For Zoe's birthday present, please send $500 in cash. It would be great if you could transfer the money to me electronically. Isn't it amazing how we can easily send money using our smartphones without even leaving the house? We live in such convenient times. I'm so glad you didn't have to go through any trouble for this, Sadie. I was stunned when Margaret requested cash for Zoe's 5th birthday present. Apparently, it was Zoe's own wish since she has a passion for saving money. Ever since then, I've been sending cash for Zoe's birthdays and school entrance celebrations. Margaret, Zoe's mother, always seems delighted, but I couldn't help but wonder if Zoe truly wanted the money. One day, when Zoe came to visit with her family, she invited me to draw with her. "Grandma, let's draw together." She didn't seem to be enjoying herself, frantically sliding the crayon across the paper. What she drew were stick figures and 6 circles. It wasn't skillful or cute. I was at a loss for words. "What is this supposed to be?" "Ghosts." Although it looked like a random drawing by a child, there was an eerie feeling to it. This picture held a bone-chilling meaning. I'm Sadie, 62 years old. My husband passed away 5 years ago, and I now live alone in a house in the countryside. Less than an hour's drive away, my only son lives with his wife and child. They used to visit me once every month or two, but recently, I only get to see them once a year. It's because my son, Tarek, has been on an overseas assignment since last year. I have a good relationship with my daughter-in-law, Margaret, but I understand it must be tiring for her to visit her in-laws without Tarek. A delicious steakhouse opened up near my place. Would you like to go eat there together? About 6 months after Tarek left for his assignment, I called Margaret and tried inviting her. Margaret's voice instantly lit up. "Wow, steak. Yes. I'd love to, but..." However, her words trailed off vaguely. "I have plans every weekend this month, Next month? I'm booked solid on weekends too, What a shame, I'm so sorry, Sadie, even though you kindly invited me." Margaret sounded apologetic. "If that's the case, I won't push it." Zoe, my granddaughter, turned 3 and started attending preschool, so they must be busy. But even after that, Margaret kept dodging my invitations without giving a clear answer, and I couldn't seem to meet her and Zoe no matter what. When I told Margaret I wanted to deliver Zoe's birthday present in person, she asked me to mail it instead. I'm booked every weekend this month too. I'm so sorry. Sadie, it's totally fine if you could just send the present. When Tarek's overseas assignment was decided, I wanted to support Margaret, who would be raising Zoe alone, in any way I could. But I couldn't even meet them face to face. Rather, realizing that my attempts to contact them might be a bother, I decided to cheer on Margaret, who was raising Zoe alone, from the sidelines. Tarek returns home once a year, and during that time, the family of 3 visits my house together. I always look forward to that one day each year. One day, as Zoe's 5th birthday was approaching, I received a call from Margaret. It was probably about a birthday present request. I had always fulfilled their requests, so Zoe was undoubtedly delighted. Last year, I gifted her a sky blue bicycle and a stuffed animal from a popular cartoon. I was excited to see what Zoe, now turning 5, would be interested in. So about Zoe's birthday this year. Just as I thought, a present request. I waited for her to continue, my heart swelling with anticipation. Zoe seems to want money instead of toys. Huh? Money? Yes, isn't Zoe quite the oddball? Margaret laughed as if troubled. She has a hobby of saving money. So, for this year's present, please give her cash. I'm sorry, Sadie. Giving a 5-year-old cash as a present feels somewhat lackluster. But if saving is her hobby, it can't be helped. I understand. Zoe is quite mature, isn't she? It must be because of your great parenting, Margaret. Oh no, not at all. Margaret is friendly and cheerful. She must treat the young Zoe with straightforward kindness too. Well then, would around $100 be good for her allowance? By the way, does Zoe still like that character? I was thinking of sending some merchandise or something as a present too. I asked casually. Instantly, Margaret raised her voice. Huh? She doesn't need that. Her voice sounded somewhat irritated, making me gasp. I was puzzled, unable to believe it was coming from the always smiling Margaret. Oh, she's already over that character. She doesn't need any stuff, so $500 in cash is fine. Don't worry about it. Her voice quickly returned to the usual cheerful Margaret. She must be troubled to receive character goods she's not interested in. While reflecting on my own thoughtlessness, something caught my attention. $500? Isn't that too much for a 5-year-old's birthday present? Yes, that's perfectly fine. I'd feel bad having you go out of your way to visit a toy store and buy this and that for her. You can just transfer the money to me electronically. Isn't it amazing how we can easily send money using smartphones these days? How convenient. I'm so glad it won't be a burden on you, Sadie. Hearing her say it so brightly, I swallowed my thoughts. Transferring money easily with a smartphone. It's certainly convenient, but it's a bit sad that this is a birthday present. Zoe, who seems to be growing up to be quite responsible, became a senior in preschool. It feels like she just started school the other day, but children really do grow up so fast. As soon as she became a senior, Margaret contacted me again. Oh, Sadie? How have you been? You haven't caught a cold or anything, right? Margaret is a considerate woman. I'm happy to hear from her every once in a while. Yes, I'm doing just fine. Are you and Zoe doing well? Yes, we're totally fine, thanks to you. Oh, and Sadie, I actually contacted you today because I have a favor to ask. With a slight hesitation, Margaret brought it up. I was thinking it would be wonderful if Zoe could get a backpack as a present from you, Sadie. Oh, Zoe's backpack. Of course, I'd love to give her one as a present. Oh, that's great. Zoe will be so happy. Zoe is my one and only adorable granddaughter. Of course, I want to give her a backpack as a present. I didn't know they were considering buying one from the start of Zoe's senior year in preschool, and I regretted making Margaret say something difficult. Then, I'll come over there. Can you help me pick out a backpack? Oh, well. Margaret faltered, giving me a bad feeling. We're buying it from a long-established bag maker, so we need to make a reservation. It's not like we can just go to the backpack section of a department store. So, there's really no need for you to come all the way out here, Sadie. I'm so glad it won't be a burden on you. Margaret's house is just under an hour's drive away. I don't think it's a burden in the slightest. But Margaret is being considerate of me, her mother-in-law. I can't selfishly ask the overly kind Margaret to make time for me. So, about the backpack, could I ask for $200? What? I'm sorry, it's expensive, isn't it? But this is normal for backpacks these days. When I last saw the backpack section, I felt the going rate was around $50, but if we're ordering from a long-established bag maker, it wouldn't be strange for it to exceed $150. Even so, $200 is. I want Zoe to use a good one and cherish it for a long time. Please, a present from grandmother. While there are many daughters-in-law who keep their distance from their mothers-in-law, Margaret honestly relies on me. I believed our relationship was good. However, during that year's Christmas break, I harbored an unshakable doubt for the first time. Tarek temporarily returned home, and the family came to visit me. Zoe, you're about to be an elementary school student. Did you get the backpack you wanted? Yeah. I got a pink backpack from a girl in the neighborhood, but I wanted a light blue one. When I asked casually, Zoe's face clouded over. Margaret hurriedly tried to smooth things over. That's not it, Sadie. The backpack we reserved just hasn't arrived yet. A middle school girl in the neighborhood happened to have a backpack that was still in pristine condition, so we just accepted it as a spare.
What? But Mom, you told me to settle for the pink one. Zoe started to say something but then shut her mouth. I couldn't see Margaret's face as she looked down at Zoe, but seeing Zoe's awkward expression made my heart ache. Before I knew it, the new year had begun, and Zoe was already an elementary school student. In a photo sent from Tarek's smartphone, Zoe was wearing a pink backpack. It seemed to be a photo Margaret had sent to Tarek from the entrance ceremony. What happened to the light blue backpack Zoe had wanted? I asked Margaret about it, but she only responded with a carefree, "It hasn't arrived yet. It's so troubling." Not sounding troubled at all. A small doubt began to spread in my heart. For Zoe's 6th and 7th birthdays, cash was specified again. But just cash is boring, so I mailed a set of fancy stationery. On the phone, Zoe's voice was so bright, I could tell she was excited.
Thank you, Grandma. The pencils are so cute, just like my friends. It's something I really wanted. I'm going to take them to school. I felt relieved to hear her childlike excitement. When thanking me for the cash, it sounded like she was skillfully reciting a set phrase, completely different from her reaction to the stationery.
"Grandma, thank you for the allowance." She didn't get excited about the cash, speaking in a mechanical way. Had Zoe really outgrown childish characters? Was she a responsible child with no desire for material things and a hobby of saving money? If not, it would mean Margaret was lying. No way. That couldn't be. I caught myself doubting, but reconsidered that cash wasn't a bad thing. Not wanting to accumulate toys, disliking character goods. I've heard many parents think that way. Cash doesn't get in the way, and Margaret must be sensible. Finally, the long-awaited Christmas break arrived. As usual, Tarek temporarily returned home, and the family of 3 came to visit me. Margaret always remembered my favorite foods and never failed to bring a fruit salad as a gift.
Grandma, sorry for the intrusion. Have you been well? I've been looking forward to seeing you.
A well-behaved daughter-in-law and a polite granddaughter. I was blessed with a wonderful family. But for some reason, Margaret and Zoe's smiles seemed fake. I told myself it was just awkwardness from only seeing each other once a year, creating emotional distance. I spent time with Zoe playing board games and cards I had prepared. When Zoe lost at Go Fish, I was surprised to see her grit her teeth and throw a tantrum.
No. I don't want Grandma to win. I wanted to win.
But what surprised me even more was that after saying just that, Zoe suddenly fell silent as if coming to her senses. Zoe glanced at Margaret, who was drinking coffee at the table behind her. Seeing Margaret paying no attention and fiddling with her smartphone, Zoe seemed relieved, as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. Zoe was only in 1st grade. It wouldn't be surprising if she cried out of frustration after losing a game. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'll do my best not to lose next time." She was a good kid, but somehow unnaturally so. Even when I gave her juice, Zoe glanced at Margaret before saying,
"Thank you, Grandma. I'll have some."
No matter what she did or when, it seemed like she was always checking Margaret's facial expression first. After dinner, Margaret and Tarek decided to go to the convenience store. Apparently, Margaret's period had unexpectedly started. Since he was going anyway, Tarek said he would also buy some beer. Margaret persistently tried to get Zoe to go with them, but Zoe holed up in the bathroom, saying, "My stomach kind of hurts." So Margaret and Tarek left together. "Grandma, did Mom and Dad leave?" Zoe immediately peeked out of the bathroom. I didn't even hear the sound of the toilet flushing.
They left. Did you want to go with them?
"No, it's okay." Zoe peered into my eyes as if she wanted to say something. "Is something wrong?" I bent down and asked, but Zoe bit her lip and looked away. Was it awkward for her to be alone with me, whom she rarely saw? As I worried, Zoe showed a smile.
"Grandma, let's draw."
Without waiting for my reply, Zoe took out a print with a white back and a pencil from her bag. She smoothly started drawing by herself. It was a picture of a girl. Black dot eyes and a horizontal line for a mouth. In other words, expressionless. Not only was there no ribbon in her hair, but her body was a mere stick figure. It was rough for a 7-year-old's drawing, and I didn't feel any cuteness.
Is this Zoe?
Yeah. The last time we drew together, it wasn't this rough. She didn't seem to be enjoying it, frantically sliding the pencil as if in a hurry. When she finished drawing the stick figure, Zoe stared at me intently. It wasn't skillful or cute. I was at a loss for words. Zoe silently gripped the pencil again.
What is this?
Around the stick figure, Zoe, there were 6 circles drawn. Those circles also had black dot eyes and a single line mouth. Well, these kids are, ghosts.
Ghosts? I see. Are they Zoe's friends?
It looked like a random drawing by a 3-year-old, but it had a strange, eerie feeling. They're not friends. These kids are my family. Zoe gave me a look as if testing me. Was it just the delusion of a young child? It seemed like it would be good to gently pat her head and say,
"Oh, they're your family."
But Zoe's direct gaze made me freeze. Grandma. It seemed like she was trying to appeal to me. As I stared at the rough drawing, almost as if being sucked into it, a dark thought suddenly surfaced.
Huh? Could this be?
Could this drawing be Zoe's SOS? It's okay. Grandma is on your side, Zoe. If there's something troubling you, please tell Grandma. Zoe, who was always a polite, good girl, now glared at me with a guarded look, like a stray dog unaccustomed to people. I felt like I was being tested. I felt a sense of dread, but I never looked away from Zoe. And then, Zoe finally opened her mouth. Grandma, help me. The moment she said those words, Zoe's eyes filled with tears. She seemed to have been trying to determine if I was an adult she could rely on. At 7 years old, she should have been innocent, but it pained me to think that she had to be suspicious even of her own grandmother. Okay, I understand. Can you tell Grandma what happened? Zoe spoke while desperately holding back her overflowing tears. Mom has someone she likes other than Dad. But that person said they would drag Mom down to hell. That's why But Grandma, what should I do? Her voice choked up, and her words were sometimes broken. Still, she managed to convey the unbelievable truth to me.
No way, that's...
My tone inadvertently grew stronger. Zoe shrunk back. I'm sorry. Even though Zoe did nothing wrong, she cowered just because my voice got louder. The fact that she apologized on reflex made me realize that Zoe was not living a childlike life. I hugged the small Zoe tightly and reassured her, it's okay, it's okay. Zoe is a smart girl. After crying a little in my arms, she gently checked the clock on the wall and wiped her tears. Mom and Dad will be back soon. Having switched gears, as soon as Margaret and the others returned home, Zoe immediately crawled into her futon, saying,
I got sleepy. I got sleepy.
It was to hide her red, swollen eyes. Do you want to sleep with Grandma? I asked, wanting to hear more, but Margaret stopped me.
Oh, come on, Sadie. Zoe is already an elementary school student. It's embarrassing for her to sleep with Grandma.
She laughed and sought Zoe's agreement.
Right, Zoe? It's embarrassing, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm an elementary school student, so I'll sleep alone. She seemed like a wonderful mom who understood Zoe well. I had believed that without a doubt until now. But now, for some reason, I felt a strong pressure from her. Come to think of it, Margaret was a bit overprotective and never left Zoe's side. Yet, she didn't seem interested in Zoe. I just felt like she was worried about Zoe saying anything unnecessary. The next day, even though she was next to Zoe and me while we were drawing, her eyes were glued to her smartphone, and she didn't say a word to us.
Zoe, you're good at drawing.
Thank you. I love drawing. We had occasional idle conversations like that, and before I knew it, 2 hours had passed. It meant that Margaret had been looking only at her smartphone for 2 hours without paying attention to Zoe. I was surprised at how quickly time had flown by, but I felt an indescribably unpleasant emotion, not quite surprise or anger, at Margaret's attitude of being so naturally indifferent to Zoe. But it was convenient for me to spend time with Zoe at a leisurely pace. By the way, I had asked Tarek to run an errand, so he was out. Zoe and I turned our backs to Margaret and filled sheet after sheet of white paper with drawings. Tarek and the others were planning to stay one more night, but apparently, Tarek had to return to his post urgently. They hurriedly left my house. "Grandma, see you again." Zoe waved her hand modestly. Margaret's face seemed to say she was lucky to be able to cut the troublesome visit short. "Oh, what a shame. I wanted to enjoy more of Sadie's delicious cooking."
Margaret, you're good at flattery.
"Oh, stop it. It's not flattery at all. Margaret really has a way with words. If I hadn't had that conversation with Zoe, I would have still believed Margaret was a good person. But now her smile seems cheap, like a mask. I swore to myself that I would absolutely tear off that mask." With a beaming smile, I saw Tarek and the others off. Zoe looked back anxiously, but she didn't need to worry. We would see each other again soon. The next day, just past noon, Tarek apparently headed to the airport alone. The only ones left in their apartment were Margaret and Zoe.
Zoe, Mommy's friend is coming over to play today. He's a very important friend, so you'd better be on your best behavior, okay?
Margaret seemed to be in high spirits, visible through a certain screen. She was busy fixing her appearance, curling her hair and reapplying mascara. After a while, the intercom rang. Margaret ran to the front door without checking who the visitor was.
"I've been waiting for you."
She greeted her so-called friend with a voice full of delight. As soon as her male friend Carl entered the room, he leered at Zoe with a sleazy grin. "Zoe, let's get along well, okay?" Zoe glared at the man with defiant eyes. The man maintained his smile and pretended to be her friend in an exaggerated manner. "Zoe, don't make such a scary face. I'm your mommy's friend, you know? Let's have some fun together." He approached Zoe with a gentle tone. But his voice suddenly dropped low, threatening Zoe.
"How long are you going to keep making that face? If you don't try hard, your mommy will fall into hell, you know? Do you understand? You'll be the one pushing your mommy down."
Zoe's body trembled slightly. "So, shall we play together?"
"Isn't that great, Zoe? Go play with Carl." "Oh, wait, $300 up front. Ha, you don't miss a thing."
I couldn't stay silent and watch anymore. I pushed open the closet door where I had been hiding and ran into the living room where Zoe was waiting.
"What are we playing? Let Grandma join in too."
Zoe was sitting with her knees hugged to her chest, as if protecting herself. As soon as she saw me, her tense expression softened, and she ran over to me. Margaret couldn't grasp the situation and could only look back and forth between Carl and me in bewilderment.
"Huh? What? Why?"
It was only natural for her to be surprised when her mother-in-law, who shouldn't have been there, suddenly appeared in her home. Margaret seemed to be simply dumbfounded, not even feeling anger yet.
"Who's this old hag?" "I'm not an old hag. I'm Zoe's grandmother. Now, mister, what shall we play? House? Drawing, perhaps?"
The man took a step back, distancing himself from me. He was perplexed by the intrusion of a seemingly crazy old woman. I embraced the shoulders of Zoe, who was clinging to my legs, and gave her the gentlest smile I could muster. Then I raised my gaze and instantly wiped the smile off my face. I leaned in close to Carl's face and stared into his eyes with a piercing gaze.
"Or were you planning to involve a child in adult games?"
I took out a few sheets of paper from the bag I was holding. They were densely filled with writing. While visiting my home, Zoe and I pretended to be drawing, but we were actually conversing through writing the entire time. Zoe had been telling me about her situation through written words. Margaret never peeked in and asked, What kind of picture are you drawing? So Zoe and I conversed earnestly through writing. We didn't have a chance to be alone, but as long as we didn't make a sound, we wouldn't get caught. I relentlessly confronted the bewildered Margaret and the man, paying no heed to their confusion.
Zoe told me that she was threatened, saying if she didn't play with this man, her mom would go to hell. Even though he said play, Zoe could sense it wasn't going to be pure, innocent play, even if she didn't fully understand. So she was scared and didn't want to play, but if she didn't play with him, her mom would suffer a terrible fate. Carrying this unknown terror, Zoe had been worrying all this time. Margaret, can you explain in detail what this is about?
Margaret's eyes darted all over, up, down, left, and right, desperately seeking an excuse. Her usual aura of being a good person was gone. She stuttered out a response.
Huh? No, I mean, it's just normal playing house, right? You'll go to hell if you don't play house? What? Oh, no, I don't remember saying anything like that. I mean, is Zoe telling some weird lie or something?
Margaret tried to play dumb. First of all, the very fact that I was here meant there was no way I would let her make excuses.
By the way, I've been in this house for the past few hours. I've been listening the whole time. Watching the whole time.
As I slowly informed her, Margaret turned pale. No matter if I was her mother-in-law, it must have been terrifying to find out I had intruded without her knowledge.
That's a lie. There's no way.
Margaret looked frightened, as if she were the victim, but she was by no means a victim.
The one who's unbelievable is you. After Tarek left the house, you were on the phone with this man, right? I heard that too.
Margaret and Carl furrowed their brows and looked at each other. I quietly urged Zoe to go to another room. The clever Zoe silently obeyed. Now I could corner them without holding back.
You were planning to sell Zoe for $300, weren't you? I don't know anything about that.
Margaret hastily denied it. So I fired back without missing a beat.
I have a recording. What?
Immediately after seeing off Tarek, who was returning to his overseas post, Margaret gleefully started making a phone call. The contents were so cruel, it made me want to cover my ears. Even without listening to the recording, Margaret's voice replayed in my head.
Hey, Tarek went back overseas. Come by Zoe right away. You'll give me the $300, right? You promise? This will pay off my debt, right? Oh, and don't get serious with a kid, okay? I'm the one you really want, right?
A mom selling her own daughter to pay off debts. Witnessing that nearly made me stop breathing. I had to suppress the urge to rush out immediately and save Zoe. And so, I had waited for this moment when she couldn't make excuses. I pointed to Margaret's pocket.
The envelope in your pocket, what's inside?
An envelope she had hurriedly stuffed into her pocket when I appeared. It was handed to Margaret by the man. I happened to be checking the contents at the time, so I could see several $100 bills peeking out.
Huh? I don't know.
It was impossible for her to feign ignorance. I sighed and informed her again.
I have a recording, and I was also filming, you know? What?
Feeling dizzy, Margaret staggered on her feet. I would never forgive Margaret for making Zoe suffer. Tears streamed down Margaret's cheeks as she held her head in her hands. She started to plead, shedding tears little by little.
Sadie, it's not what you think. No, I was wrong. I'm sorry. The truth is, I have debts, so I had no choice but to offer up Zoe. I really made a mistake. I'm sorry.
Realizing she couldn't deceive me anymore, Margaret tried to win me over with tears. The one she should be apologizing to wasn't me, but Zoe. She probably just wanted to sweep this painful situation under the rug.
The debts, what did you rack them up for? Like brand name stuff?
I took a look around the room. There were no visible brand name items, and neither the room nor Margaret herself seemed very flashy.
Tell me the truth. Well, you see,
Margaret stammered. As I waited for a response, a voice rang out from behind me. It's for hospital bills. It was Zoe. She stood straight, with a resolute expression on her face. I had made her wait in another room, but she must have been eavesdropping. Unable to hold back any longer, she had rushed out. It's for hospital bills, right, Mom? Zoe and I locked our eyes on Margaret, not letting her out of our sight. Margaret's face contorted in anguish, and her legs trembled slightly. Eventually, she stomped on the floor loudly with her right foot. I embraced Zoe, whose body had stiffened, shielding her.
Ugh, fine. It's for hospital bills, so what? They're hospital bills, so it can't be helped. Then, Sadie, if you think Zoe is so pitiful, why don't you pay the $300? Whenever I ask you for money, you always seem reluctant. That's why I had no choice but to sell Zoe. It's your fault for being stingy.
Margaret's true nature was revealed. The mom who had been agonizing over whether she should sacrifice Zoe to protect herself screamed in a shrill voice like a child throwing a tantrum. Zoe silently watched her mom's ugly behavior.
The money I gave you for Zoe's birthdays and backpack, you were using it for yourself after all. Is it so wrong for a parent to manage the money? It is wrong.
I clearly stated to Margaret, who was brazenly joking around. Margaret, who had been grinning hatefully, shut her mouth.
If you had told me from the start that it was for hospital bills, I would have given you the money. But you were going to the hospital for a reason you couldn't honestly say, right?
This time, Margaret sulked and didn't say a word. She was more childish than 7-year-old Zoe. Living thoughtlessly, following her own desires, had she become completely selfish?
The hospital, it was an OB/GYN clinic, wasn't it? To erase the life growing in your belly.
The stick figure in 6 circles Zoe had drawn. The 6 circles represented the lives that had disappeared. If I had seen that drawing and felt nothing or gotten angry, I think Zoe would have kept her mouth shut. Because I tried to understand what it meant and to know Zoe's feelings, she acknowledged me as an adult she could trust and rely on. Grandma, they're my little brothers and sisters. You can't see them, but they haven't disappeared. That's right. I'm sorry, Zoe. Zoe turned to face Margaret and quietly asked, Don't tell me that if I'm not a good girl, Mom will go to hell to be with my little brothers? In fact, it seems Margaret had been leaving Zoe behind and going out to have fun on a regular basis. Taking advantage of Tarek's overseas assignment, she had been fully enjoying the single life. She would only return home in the morning or evening to give Zoe a boxed lunch or cup noodles. But Margaret had a good public image, so she properly participated in school events, and their family was not recognized as having problems. While Margaret was mostly out like this, there were times when she would stay home for about a week. At those times, I was happy to have Mom with me all the time, but Mom was in really bad shape and irritable. When I tried to approach her to talk, she said, I'm tired from just giving birth to your little brother or sister. She said it costs a lot of money to have a baby. So, when I asked where the baby was, Zoe bit her lip. I had heard before how Margaret answered at that time. Who knows? In hell, I guess. When Zoe told me this, she couldn't hold back her tears and let them overflow. She had been stifling her voice so Margaret wouldn't notice. Playing around casually and treating the life she was blessed with carelessly for selfish reasons. It's not a forgivable act. Moreover, according to Zoe, this had happened 6 times.
Mom, I may not be a good girl right now, but please, please don't say that I will go to hell to be with my little brothers there. I really, really hate that. Because my little brothers aren't in hell.
Clenching her small fists, Zoe desperately pleaded. And then, she screamed with all her might.
If you want to go to hell, go by yourself, Mom.
The obedient Zoe had rebelled for the first time. Margaret staggered backward as if she had been hit in the head.
Zoe! I am your mom. Don't talk to me that way.
I know. My friends' moms stay at home, make meals for them, and chat with them. Some moms are busy with work, but none of them are busy getting friendly with men like you. Only 7 years old, Zoe, a first grader, was thinking much more like an adult than Margaret.
Huh? Don't mess with me.
Margaret's eyes narrowed, rapidly filling with hatred. She vigorously raised her fist, with veins popping out. Or so I thought, but Margaret's arm dropped limply. Eventually, all the strength drained from her body, and she slumped down onto the floor.
Tarek! Why are you here?
When I turned around, Tarek was standing behind me. Margaret had abruptly lost her momentum when she noticed him.
You're supposed to be gone. Wait, this isn't making any sense. Why are you here?
Tarek said to the confused Margaret in a flat voice.
Is it weird for me to be in my own home? More importantly, isn't it weirder for a strange man to be here?
Carl, who had been called a strange man, had completely blended into the background, so he jumped up in surprise.
What were you planning to do with Zoe?
Even when spoken to, Carl still pretended to be part of the background and held his breath. He didn't pick a fight or try to run away. He seemed quite timid.
If you don't want to answer, that's fine. You can tell the rest to the police. What? Why are you surprised? You tried to buy a 7-year-old child for $300, didn't you?
The man mumbled.
Well, it was just an attempt.
While stammering, Tarek strode up to Carl and grabbed him by the collar.
I don't want to hear excuses. Get lost.
If Tarek hadn't been grabbing his collar, the man's legs were shaking so much he wouldn't have been able to stand. The sound of the front door opening was heard, and 2 police officers barged in unceremoniously. The man was arrested on the spot. His legs were frozen, and he couldn't walk, so the police officers grabbed him by both arms and took him away like a captured alien.
Why the police? Did you call them? Why is this happening?
Tarek explained to the bewildered Margaret, with a terribly cold expression.
It was a lie that I had to suddenly return to my post. After hearing about Zoe from Mom, I deliberately left the house empty to confirm the truth.
Although Zoe, a child, may not have had a definite grasp of the facts, it didn't seem like a lie or misunderstanding. When I secretly told Tarek, he said he actually had some suspicions. Sometimes Margaret would withdraw $2,000 or $3,000 from savings at once, and when he tried to video call, she almost never answered. Zoe didn't consult Tarek because Margaret had been telling her.
Don't tell Dad or the teacher about what happens at home.
That's not true. I was just deceived by Carl. I was actually protecting Zoe. Really? I was going to try my best to only let him take a few photos. Margaret clung weakly to Tarek. Even seeing Margaret's tears, Tarek was completely unmoved. On the contrary, he openly showed his disgust and looked down on Margaret.
I didn't know Margaret was such a foolish human being.
I just told you earlier. Did you already forget? I said I was recording audio and video. I pointed to the smartphone propped up on the shelf in the living room. Tarek had set up one he used to use in advance. By connecting it to a video call, Tarek and I could check the interior in real time. Of course, we were also recording video.
I heard you on the phone with that man too. You said he could do whatever he wanted with Zoe. Oh, no, that's not true.
First of all, I couldn't have waited inside the house without Tarek's cooperation. Margaret let out a voiceless, She reached out to Tarek but was strongly brushed off. Undeterred, she turned her hand toward Zoe. However, even Zoe avoided her with a sharp look. Abandoned by her family, Margaret pursed her lips and looked up at the heavens. Then, the police officers from earlier returned. The hand that her family wouldn't hold was taken by the police officer.
Huh? Why are the police taking me? Margaret, you did something that required the police's attention too.
She had tried to make a child do something inappropriate. Even if it ended in an attempt, it was unforgivable.
Huh, why, no, Zoe.
As Margaret was being taken away by the police, Zoe asked, "Mom, are you going to hell?"
What? No, I don't want to go to hell.
The police officers tightly restrained Margaret, who had started making a commotion, and dragged her away without mercy.
No! Let me go! I don't want to go!
Margaret was making a huge fuss like a disobedient child. Eventually, her voice faded away, and when I looked outside, the police car had driven off. I later heard that Margaret had indeed been cheating, feeling like she was single. Thinking Tarek, who was on an overseas assignment, would never find out, she had been boldly playing around and apparently had repeated unwanted pregnancies. Since the incident with Zoe ended in an attempt, Margaret and the man were given a suspended prosecution. The man wasn't serious about Margaret, but he thought it was rather lucky when she occasionally got pregnant. He would have her examined by a doctor he knew, overcharge her more than the going rate, and he could receive kickbacks.
That's why I was never really serious from the bottom of my heart. It was just for fun. I'm so sorry.
The deeper the man's apology, the more miserable Margaret seemed. On the other hand, Margaret and Tarek got divorced. She cried and protested, but someone who tries to sell their daughter has no right to refuse. Contact with Zoe was also prohibited. At the time of the arrest, she had been screaming and crying so much that someone must have filmed it, and without our knowledge, she had become a topic on social media as the wailing old hag. Even though we never spread rumors, somehow not only Margaret's name but also the reason for her arrest had spread. The internet world is scary. After the divorce, Margaret tried to come and contact Zoe, but the neighbors immediately reported her, so nothing came of it. I heard rumors that Margaret felt like she was constantly being watched both in the online world and in the real world, and she had become terribly self-conscious and was suffering from mental instability. Since Tarek had to return overseas, I took care of Zoe for a while. As if the long time we couldn't see each other had been a lie, Zoe and I got along well and had endless conversations.
You know this happened and then this happened. See? Grandma.
Zoe kept talking, her words overflowing, sometimes saying incoherent things. Maybe she wasn't as level-headed as I thought. But even the chatty Zoe was childlike and adorable. After a while, Zoe left to go overseas to Tarek's post. The lively and fun times passed in the blink of an eye, and the room I surveyed felt spacious. About 3 months after Zoe had gone overseas, a letter arrived in the mailbox. It was from Zoe. Surprisingly, it was written in French. I pulled out a dusty French-English dictionary and took my time reading the letter. Although there were some mistakes here and there, I was happy to see that Zoe was also working hard overseas.
That's it. I'll learn French. It would be so much fun to be able to chat with Zoe in French.
Even in my 60s, it seems I can still find things I want to do and dreams to pursue.
When I can speak French, I'll go visit Tarek and surprise him.
With a goal in mind, the little loneliness that had remained in my heart quietly disappeared. Right now, I'm imagining a bright future, my heart swelling with anticipation.
There's no more land for us to lease out here.
When I rushed into the major bank in my pickup truck, the female receptionist named Wendy gave me an openly disgusted look. And when I asked her to call the loan officer, instead of doing as I asked, she made this rude remark. If you're working at a bank counter, there's a level of customer service you're supposed to provide to any client, regardless of who they are. I don't have time to waste either. Especially during this season, I'm extremely busy with the harvest and everything. I finally managed to carve out some time to come here amidst all that. Irritated, I decided I'd had enough.
Then I'm canceling the land lease contract. What? Wait, you're leasing out land ? Let me call the representative. Just wait a minute.
She suddenly started panicking, but I left the bank without hearing her out till the end. As a result, she would come to regret her behavior in this moment. My name is Sharon. After graduating from agricultural college, I took over my family's farm instead of getting a job. Now at 42, with my elderly parents retired, I manage the vast fields alone. Marriage seems to be a high hurdle for someone from a farming family, so I'm still single. My family home is what you'd call a big landowner in the countryside, if I do say so myself. We own vast tracts of land, as well as numerous rental properties like apartments and parking lots. We do have fields, but actually, we could live comfortably even without doing any farming. However, my parents diligently tilled the fields and cultivated traditional vegetables that have been around for a long time.
There are few farmers left growing these vegetables. If we quit, these vegetables might go extinct. They're precious things we've inherited from our ancestors. We'll keep it going as long as we're able.
Saying that, they protected the fields passed down through generations. But my parents said there was no need for me to force myself to take over the farm. That land could be turned into vacant lots like our other properties, they said, but I'm an only child. If I don't take over, the traditional vegetables that our ancestors and parents have protected and inherited might die out in my generation. I didn't want to let my parents' efforts, carried on this far, go to waste. For these reasons, when I went to college, I chose an agricultural school and decided to take over the farm. There's a slow season in farming, but no days off. Every day is very busy, but by trying out new fertilizers, improving the soil, the more effort you put in, the better quality vegetables you get. I took pride in the fact that I was carrying on the traditional vegetables, and I lived each day feeling fulfilled in my own way. Even calling it agricultural management, it's quite a sizable operation. Furthermore, since we also own other land and properties, the sums involved are substantial, and at our bank, a man in his 40s named Georgie has been assigned as our representative. He usually comes to our place to handle most of the procedures, but for renewing lease contracts, I have to go to the bank regularly. Normally that's not a problem, but during the busy harvesting season, it's quite difficult to find the time for that. That day too, I was extremely busy in the peak season. I somehow managed to make time and rushed straight from the fields to the major bank in my pickup truck, but the female receptionist named Wendy gave me an openly disgusted look. She twisted her face upon seeing me. When I entered the bank, I was wearing work clothes that could get dirty, since I had come in between tasks. On top of that, I had on boots a typical farmer style. Admittedly, it's not a neat and tidy appearance, but I had at least brushed off the mud and such out of basic courtesy. It's not some high-end hotel or a party venue. There shouldn't be any dress code for customers visiting a bank. In fact, there are even people who come in sweatpants and sandals, so there's no reason to make such a nasty face at someone in work clothes. Nevertheless, she looked me up and down, wrinkling her nose as if to say I was filthy. Then, she let out an exaggerated sigh. I didn't appreciate her rude attitude of deliberately making it obvious that she found me unpleasant. Yet, it wasn't something I felt the need to complain about either. I just wanted to quickly finish my business and get back to work. Thinking that, I asked with a wry smile for her to call my representative.
"Excuse me, could you please call Georgie, my representative?"
However, instead of calling him, she said something unbelievable.
"And what business do you have with him? He's not free either. We both have limited time, you know. I'm sorry, but I think you should refrain from wasting it."
No, that's not. I started to explain but stopped. I have no obligation to bother explaining to someone so rude. It's not even worth that effort.
Ah, forget it. Anyway, just call him for me, would you? He'll understand when you do.
If I've said this much, anyone would normally infer that there's something going on. Yet, she still refused to put me through. In fact, she went on to disparage me in an even more sarcastic tone. Everyone says that, you know. People hoping for a loan, lying that there's an appointment when there isn't, insisting to just call them because they'll understand. What she's saying may well happen sometimes. But it's not up to her to decide whether to give a loan or not, and in the first place, I'm not here hoping for a loan. It just happens that Georgie, our representative, is also in charge of loans.
Is that so? But I'm different. If you check, you should realize that, so I'm sorry, but could you please call him quickly? I'm busy too, you know.
It's not like I'm asking for anything difficult. I just want her to call my representative. That's all I'm requesting. I can't understand why she's so stubbornly refusing to put me through.
There's no way to know if you're really different or not, is there? I've seen plenty of people like you too. I can pretty much tell from how you're dressed.
You're. Saying that, she twirled the ends of her long hair with one hand while looking at me.
If you're going to lie, you could have at least borrowed some proper clothes.
When all she had to do was put me through, I've been insulted and had my time wasted for over 10 minutes now.
Then your ability to judge people is completely useless. And you're just a receptionist. Your job is to receive customers and put them through, right? It's not your place to decide whether to refuse them or not. Now, hurry up and transfer me.
I couldn't help raising my voice. Even I had reached my limit. Then, incredibly, instead of putting me through, she hurled awful abuse at me. Those words made me decide on a certain course of action.
Banks aren't charities, you know. We can't lend to people who don't have the ability to pay back. Trying to borrow money when you can't pay it back is the same as begging. Have you no shame?
Even so, treating a customer like a beggar is going too far. Those are not words she should be using to me, a customer, as a mere receptionist. Just who does she think she is? On top of that, she hurled even more abuse at me.
Let me put it in a way you might understand. There's no money to lend to poor farmers like you.
If you're working at a bank counter, there's a certain level of customer service you should provide to any client, regardless of who they are. It's unacceptable to look down on someone just because they're a farmer and treat them like a poor farmer. Admittedly, I did come in a pickup truck. And since I was planning to go back to the fields, I'm still wearing my work clothes without having changed. From that, she probably judged that I'm a farmer, but even so, that doesn't mean I should be scorned as a poor farmer. It's not like I caused her any trouble with my pickup truck or attire. I'm extremely busy, especially during this season. And yet, I finally managed to make time to come here. Later on, she would come to regret her behavior in this moment. As a result of this pointless back and forth, I decided enough was enough. Having had it, I simply said it out loud.
Forget it, I'm leaving. Then I'm canceling the land lease contract. What? Wait, you're leasing land? What? What do you mean? I'll call the representative, so please wait.
Suddenly flustered by the mention of leasing land, the woman panicked.
I just assumed you were here for a loan consultation. If that's not it, then it's fine. Georgie, was it ? I'll call him right away. If it's about leasing land, you should have said so from the start.
Now she's saying she'll call him right away, so I should wait, but I had no intention of listening anymore. After being treated this way, I have no lingering attachment to this bank. I can easily find other business partners elsewhere. It makes no difference to me whether I do business with them or not.
I said forget it. I'm leaving. Tell Georgie the contract won't be renewed, it's over. Wait. Please wait. I'll call Georgie. Hey, wait.
It's too late. Ignoring her calls for me to stop, I left the bank. As I drove my pickup truck out of the bank, my cell phone rang immediately. I pulled over to check, and the caller was Georgie from the bank. I heard you came by earlier. I was told you left. Did something happen? I was a little surprised that he hadn't heard anything from Wendy, but I replied calmly. Yes, that's right. I was treated very rudely at the reception. I intend to terminate our business relationship here. Could you please ask the receptionist, Wendy, what happened? She knows everything. Actually, I had been leasing land to the bank. The parking lot next to the bank is our land. The bank had asked us to sell it to them since there's no other land they can use for parking, but we didn't feel any immediate need to sell, so we've been leasing it to them with a contract renewal every 6 months. This time, I went to the bank for the renewal procedure. Not only that, but the profits from the fields, rental income from properties, all of our assets were entrusted to this bank. That's right, from the bank's perspective, I'm a valued customer. That's precisely why I even have a dedicated representative. Shocked by my sudden declaration of terminating our business, Georgie was astonished.
What exclamation question mark Wendy did? I am terribly sorry. I will confirm with her and have her apologize, so please, if we could just talk.
It seemed he really hadn't heard anything from her after all. Wendy probably didn't mention anything inconvenient for herself, and simply told him that she had called for Georgie, but I left. Without even understanding the situation.
Please, I beg you.
Georgie kept apologizing. I could practically see him bowing his head over the phone. However, he's not the problem. I had already decided not to forgive Wendy.
No, it's fine. I've already wasted enough time there. I can't waste any more. I'm extremely busy today. If you'll excuse me.
With that, I ended the call. I feel bad for Georgie getting caught up in this, but the receptionist is essentially the face of that bank. They're the first point of contact with customers, so I'll have to decline doing business with a bank where they judge customers based on their attire and vehicle and respond so rudely. My decision isn't simply because I was looked down upon as a farmer. They hired someone who judges people based on their clothes and occupation and put them at the reception desk. I can't trust a bank like that. Even after hanging up, there were several incoming calls, but I ignored them all. Leaving my cell phone in the truck, I went back to working in the fields. Just when I thought it was over, I was flabbergasted. Incredibly, in less than an hour, Mom Olivia showed up at the fields with Georgie in tow.
What exclamation question mark? What's going on? Why is Georgie with you, Mom?
According to Olivia, Georgie had suddenly stopped by the house. Georgie has been our representative since my parents' generation. It seems our receptionist was extremely rude to your daughter. Seeing how desperate he seemed, I decided to hear him out for the time being. He said he wanted to meet and apologize no matter what, so she brought him to the fields. I couldn't believe he'd get my retired mother involved. I questioned him in a slightly harsh tone.
Georgie, didn't I tell you earlier that I'm busy today? As you can see, we're in our peak season right now. I somehow managed to make time to come in the middle of that, only to be refused a transfer and spoken to rudely. I'm fed up. I can't spare any more time for you. Please leave. Ask Wendy about what happened.
I thought he'd give up after that, but Georgie suddenly bowed deeply. I am terribly sorry. Olivia hastily.
Oh my! Please stop that.
shouted. But he remained motionless. I was at a loss with him like that.
Even if you bow your head, I still can't do the impossible. I'm incredibly busy right now.
This is not a lie or anything. I am literally very busy. It would be great if Olivia and Dad could help, but they both retired due to back pain, so that's difficult too. I can't ask other farmers for help either. They're all in their peak season as well. Then Georgie said something unbelievable.
I'll help. What should I do? !
As he spoke, he was already taking off his suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves.
What !
Even I was surprised by this. Certainly, I'm so busy that I could use Georgie's help. There are simple tasks too, so if he's offering to help, it would indeed be appreciated. But, as I hesitated, Olivia said,
Hey, Georgie is offering to help, so why not let him? Then, with that free time, you can listen to what he has to say. Thank you very much. I'll do my absolute best, so please.
He nodded eagerly, seizing the opportunity. All right then. I reluctantly accepted his proposal. But surprisingly, he was quite skilled. He harvested the vegetables and stacked them well. Thanks to him, a task I expected to take about 3 hours alone was finished in 2 hours.
Have you perhaps done farm work before?
To my surprise, he stretched his back, laughed, and told me.
Actually, my grandmother used to have a home garden. I often helped out when I was little. It's surprising how much the body remembers.
Olivia brought us some tea, so as we took a break at the edge of the field, I explained the circumstances this time as promised.
Judging customers based on their clothes and vehicle, looking down on them, and hurling rude words. I can't trust a bank with a receptionist like that.
Hearing that, he nodded deeply several times as if finally understanding. I can't believe such a thing. Your anger is justified. That should never happen. I am terribly sorry. And then, actually, he shared the inside story. Apparently, Wendy is the bank president's daughter. She had initially been working at another branch, but after causing problems there, she was sent to this branch. Her work attitude was poor and the branch manager had warned her many times, but she never improved. By telling me these internal circumstances that normally shouldn't be disclosed to outsiders, his sincerity fully came through. And the reason why someone like her was at the reception desk. This incident is absolutely unforgivable. We will take firm action. First, could you please put the termination of our business on hold for the time being? Please judge based on our future response. Georgie spoke in a serious manner. I can't forgive Wendy, but I felt I could trust him. So I decided to give him a little leeway. The next day, the doorbell rang, and when I went outside, Georgie and Wendy were there. For some reason, they were both dressed in work clothes and wearing boots. We caused you a great deal of trouble yesterday. I am terribly sorry. I've brought Wendy here again to apologize. Come on, Wendy. Prompted by Georgie, Wendy bowed to me while averting her eyes.
I was extremely rude yesterday.
I apologize. Dissatisfied, with an attitude that clearly showed she was being forced to say it reluctantly. I cut her off.
If it's not a sincere apology, I don't need it.
Seeing this, Georgie scolded Wendy with a furious expression.
You still don't seem to understand what you've done. I explained that the survival of this branch depends on her. Are you trying to drive this branch to closure ?
I've known him for several years now, but this was the first time I saw him get angry. He was always smiling, so I thought he was a bit unreliable, but I gained new respect for him as someone who can properly say what needs to be said. Even Wendy couldn't help but uncomfortably avert her eyes at Georgie's harsh scolding. Still, she pursed her lips and argued back.
I did hear that, but isn't that an exaggeration? They're just farmers, you know? They can't have that much power.
Georgie yelled at her even more.
Our parking lot is on her land. She came yesterday to renew that contract. If we lose our business with her, we lose our parking lot. Who's going to come to a bank with no parking in that location? !
What he said must have finally reached that thick skull of hers. Hearing that, she turned pale.
No way! Isn't that our land? ! It's her land. And that's not all. Her family is the biggest landowner in this whole area. We're entrusted with the sale and lease of their land, contract farming, and the management of those assets. She's an extremely important customer for us.
Even she was at a loss for words at this. He gave her a stern look, then turned back to me and made an unexpected proposal. Could you let her experience farm work as training during your busy season? I don't think you'll forgive us just for this, but please feel free to work her to the bone. For the first 3 days, I'll help out as well to supervise her. Hearing that, I couldn't help but smile. Since we're entering our peak season, even someone like her is better than nothing, and having Georgie there to supervise will be a huge help. It'll be a fitting punishment for Wendy too. But can she, who looked down on farmers, endure this job? As expected, Wendy started making a fuss at the words during the busy season.
What? Not just 1 day! I didn't hear anything about doing it for that long. That's impossible.
As she hastily denied it, Georgie silenced her by saying,
If it's impossible, it can't be helped. If we lose a customer like her because of you, your father, the bank president, will have to take appropriate responsibility too. Dad has nothing to do with this!
Using his connections to get her hired, then forcibly reassigning his daughter who caused more problems to another branch. If that daughter then drives that branch to closure, he'll inevitably be held accountable. That's not a responsibility a mere receptionist can bear. Of course, the bank president who used his position to assign and spoil his daughter also bears responsibility. Wendy must have finally realized the gravity of what she had done, as she started trembling while gripping the sleeves of her work clothes. I turned a beaming smile towards her.
You'll be doing simple tasks, so it's fine even if you've never worked in the fields before. All you need is physical strength. Now then, shall we have you work to your heart's content?
Upon hearing this, the word despair appeared on her face. That evening, gazing at the fields dyed red by the sun, I let out a satisfied sigh.
Thank you. Thanks to you, Georgie, we were able to harvest much faster than I expected. No, I'm glad to be of help. We're the ones who caused you trouble.
With his hard work, our work efficiency increased by 1.5 times. The harvest I had given up on finishing before next week's rain now looks like it'll somehow make it in time. Well, as expected, she wasn't of much use.
Dig here. Carefully, so you don't damage the vegetables. Put more strength into it. Don't slack off.
Relentlessly instructed by Georgie like this all day, towards the end, she was sitting on the ground, crying as she dug up the soil. She probably never had to do this kind of work before. Her face was covered in sweat and dirt, and mud was caked all over her hair. Now that the work was finally over, Wendy collapsed on the ground, seemingly unable to speak. With a wry smile, I looked down at Wendy, who was sitting on the ground covered in mud.
Good work today. No, it's quite rewarding. I'll be back to help tomorrow too.
Georgie said with a refreshing smile.
Tomorrow too! Exclamation question mark.
In contrast to him, Wendy collapsed limply on the ground. And true to his word, Georgie brought Wendy to help the entire week. At first, she complained, but after a while, she seemed to give up and moved in silence. If she slacked off even a little,
do your best to somehow get her to withdraw the termination of our business. If this branch closes, it'll be your responsibility. It's your own rude words and actions that caused this. Show some sincerity.
She would be threatened. Georgie drilled farm work into Wendy during that week. And then, he lent her to us for a month under the pretext of employee training. Wendy, now bearing the future of the branch and even her father's future on her shoulders as she worked. I felt a little sorry for her, but if we didn't go this far, she probably wouldn't have understood the foolishness of her own actions. This training was quite effective. As I watched her digging in the soil, covered in mud and crying, I started to feel like I could continue the contract with the bank after all. At first, I was angry at her, but as I saw her going home exhausted and wobbling every day, my anger gradually subsided. Georgie must have anticipated this and planned this kind of training. He's quite the schemer himself. After the training, I went to the bank again and renewed the contract. Just as Georgie had planned. Seriously, I take my hat off to you. You knew it would turn out this way, didn't you?
No, I just showed my sincerity to the best of my ability.
Georgie processed the paperwork with a really nice smile. Wendy is no longer at the reception desk. After that training, we heard from the bank president that his daughter had resigned for personal reasons. Rather than personal reasons, it might be more accurate to say they made her quit before she could be fired. Apparently, just before hanging up, the bank president's voice could be heard cursing at his daughter over the phone.
The branch manager was out, so I took the call. They say they were a close parent and child, but it was terrible. I wonder if their relationship as parent and child is over now. I guess that's all their relationship amounted to in the end.
Georgie told me with a wry smile. It's good that we were somehow able to renew the contract, but if I had gone through with terminating our business, it would have caused the bank a huge loss. Not to brag, but just the assets we have deposited are worth that much, and if we stopped leasing the parking lot, the impact would have been immediate. Avoiding that wasn't because Wendy helped with the farm work, but because Georgie arranged it and moved my heart. Even if Wendy were to be reinstated, there's surely no place for her at that branch anymore. Incidentally, her father didn't come out of this unscathed either. It was good that he made his daughter quit, but it was too late. Through the branch manager, the circumstances this time and her past behavior were brought up at an executive meeting, and criticism from the other executives converged on the bank president. It even developed into a situation where he might have to resign.
Since we caused you trouble, I'll tell you this in secret. Please keep it strictly confidential. The bank president might be replaced soon,
Georgie said with a laugh. It's not hard to imagine how the bank president, who lost his job due to his daughter's foolish actions, will treat her. Thinking about Wendy's future, I muttered in my heart that it turned out to be a painful price to pay. Since then, there's been a small change in our fields. On weekends, an apprentice started coming to help. There was this strange person who had awakened to the joy of farming and wanted to help even just on weekends when he was off work, and I allowed it.
Nothing beats a drink after work.
Georgie, who for some reason was relaxing at our place. That's right, the apprentice is him. Since then, he's been coming to help almost every week, and when Olivia says, "Since you're here, why not have a meal before you go?" he invites himself into the house. How cheeky of him. But when I see him stuffing his mouth full of sandwiches,
This sandwich is the best treat of all.
And puffing out his cheeks happily, I can't help but laugh too. It must be rewarding to feed him. Olivia is also enthusiastically preparing various meals just for him.
Quit the bank and come work for us. You can have a permanent position too. What? No, I couldn't. Sharon would hate that.
Oh, I wouldn't mind, you know? Hard workers with guts are valuable. When I teased him, his ears turned bright red, belying his age. The day when the joke is no longer a joke might be near.
This person hasn't regained consciousness even once since being brought to the hospital.
Yes, that's right. It seems her body became weaker after a fracture before.
Then it's about time, isn't it? I'll prepare the funeral wreath.
As I was speechless at my assailant Nancy's words, Nancy, without showing any concern for me, looked down at Mom lying in the bed and said,
"So, I can finally say goodbye,"
and laughed mockingly before walking away. I was dumbfounded, unable to understand and too stunned to even feel angry. I sat down, placed my hand on my forehead, and sighed. This was too harsh to be a joke. Not funny at all. Is it even right to say such things about one's own parent? I don't have children, so I don't know, but I think I would be sad if my daughter spoke to me that way. As I thought this, my Aunt Barbara, who had been unconscious, slowly began to rise.
"Oh my! Barbara!"
I woke up because I heard Nancy's voice. That's right, there was something I wanted to tell before I die. Barbara spoke to me with a clarity unexpected from someone who had been unconscious. And I will never forget the smile on her face. Just 3 days later, Barbara passed away in the hospital where she was admitted. It was around the time when the buds on the cherry tree visible from the hospital room window were just beginning to bloom. My name is Linda. I am 58 years old this year, and my husband David, who is the same age, and I have lived a peaceful life without any major fights or troubles since our marriage. The only regret in our lives was not having children, but after we both turned 50, we stopped worrying about it from the bottom of our hearts and started looking forward to how we would spend our retirement together. David had been running a chain of eateries for a long time, but was transferred to the headquarters for his skills, and now he is in charge of several stores, leading a busy life. As a housewife, I tried my best to support my busy husband by always being frugal and ensuring he could truly rest when he came home by keeping the room clean and always arranging flowers by the living room window every weekend. I don't know if David is interested in flowers, but arranging seasonal flowers in a vase became my only hobby, hoping it would bring him some comfort. That's an unusual flower, isn't it?
Lily of the valley?
David pointed at the flower on the table and said to me. Without touching his breakfast bread and with a cup of black coffee in one hand and the newspaper in the other, he shifted his gaze to the flower. It's a snowdrop. In a small vase made for single flowers, a delicate white flower blooms downward at the tip of its slender stem, presenting a cool demeanor. The white flower, mistaken by David for a lily of the valley, is a cute flower that tells us of the arrival of spring in our garden. They bloomed in the garden's flower bed again this year. I decorated with a few because they're so cute. They might wither quickly since they don't take up water well.
I see. They're beautiful.
David folded the newspaper on the table and quietly murmured as he looked at the flower again. How has Barbara been lately?
What do you mean?
Are you in touch? Aren't you going to visit during the holidays this year? Even though we didn't have children, we still visited each other's parents a few times a year. However, recently, David has been busy with the opening preparations of new eateries he's in charge of, making it difficult to take a long break. David folded the newspaper, looked up at the clock on the wall, and stood up. That was my cue to hand him his lunch. Take care. Will you be home early today?
Not sure. Oh, no. I'll be home early today,
David said while looking at the calendar on the wall. Today was their wedding anniversary. After David left the house, I started preparing to make the special meal I had planned for today. The sunlight streaming through the curtains grew stronger, signaling it was noon. I was heating up last night's dinner in the microwave when the phone rang. The landline, which rarely rings. It was mostly unused, but calls from relatives or Barbara usually came through it. So, when the landline rang, it often meant something had happened with the family, and I picked up the receiver a bit nervously. Hello? It was Barbara on the line.
It's been a while, hasn't it?
Barbara greeted me in her usual tone. Sorry for calling out of the blue. David's not there, I assume, since it's a weekday. There's something I wanted to ask him. I see. I'll pass the message when he gets back. That would be great, thank you. Actually, Barbara explained that she had fractured her right leg recently when she missed a step on her staircase at home. She had called an ambulance herself and received treatment, but now she was finding it difficult to do shopping due to her condition.
Having a fractured leg is really troublesome. I've been able to take care of myself until now, but even small tasks have become difficult at this age.
I see. If it's okay with you, I can help out. I'm a housewife and have some free time.
What are you talking about? I know because I was a housewife too. It's tough being a housewife. Husbands expect more than just ordinary housework as if it's a given. Isn't David being demanding?
I chuckled over the phone. David is very kind and wouldn't get upset over me cutting corners with the housework. I thought Barbara, being his mom, must understand this even better than I do, maybe even more than I realize. That night, David came home unusually early. We enjoyed a delicious dinner together, sipped on slightly expensive beer, and reminisced about funny stories from when we first met. The cake David brought home was a cheesecake from my favorite shop. The shop was in the opposite direction of his workplace, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought that he went out of his way to choose my favorite shop instead of one nearby. After dinner, while doing the dishes, I told David about the call from Barbara. David came to my side while I was washing the dishes. What did you say? I wiped the washed dishes with a towel and put them back on the shelf. Barbara fractured her leg at home. She asked if you could take her to the hospital and for shopping, maybe once every 2 weeks, by car.
Once every 2 weeks? She's really holding back. Actually, someone needs to take care of Mom. Life would be uncertain otherwise.
I know it might be presumptuous, but when I offered to help, she refused. She told me to take good care of you instead. David laughed heartily and then immediately turned serious. With Fael gone, there had always been concerns about Barbara's living situation. David, somewhat reluctantly, took out his mobile phone and, while scratching his head, "Guess I should give her a call," muttered. "Ah, it's me, David." "Sis?" "Ah, right. David walked out of the living room with his mobile phone to his ear. The call was to Nancy. Nancy is a year older than David and works in PR for a company in the city center. Honestly, I don't know much about Nancy, who hardly ever shows up at family gatherings, but I was vaguely aware that Barbara spoke ill of her, so I knew their relationship wasn't good. David returned with a grim expression and sat down. "She said she doesn't care about Mom." "That's terrible." "Well, it's not like we can do much either. Can't be helped. I know someone who arranges home helpers. I'll talk to them sometime." David acted swiftly, and by the following week, a home helper started visiting Barbara's house. Initially, Barbara complained, but she eventually accepted the fact that she couldn't manage everything on her own and expressed her gratitude for David's kindness. Years passed by in the blink of an eye. As usual, I opened the curtains to let in the morning sunlight. The snowdrops that used to bloom in our garden around this time every year were absent. While the green stems of these bulbous plants were growing, they hadn't blossomed into their characteristic white flowers. It happens, I thought, slightly disappointed, as I yawned. The landline rang. Caught off guard by the phone ringing mid-yawn, I ended up coughing. As I picked up the receiver, my heart rate sped up when the caller identified themselves as the reception at the university hospital.
I'll be right there.
Without asking for details, I quickly got ready and jumped into the car. I had heard that Barbara's health had been deteriorating. Frantically, I grabbed my mobile phone to inform David that I was heading to Barbara's hospital. Noticing my fingers trembling on the steering wheel, I tried to calm my nerves by taking deep breaths at a red light. It's going to be okay. It has to be. For some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about the snowdrops I had seen in the flower bed earlier. Despite their lush green stems, the absence of even a single bud made them look more like weeds, unsettling me in my current state. Upon arriving at the hospital, I found David waiting. He was in his suit, apparently having been inspecting a nearby store when I called, and had rushed over. We were just told it might be tough considering her age. David looked exhausted as he shared this with me. Leaving David outside, I lightly knocked and entered Barbara's hospital room. There, Barbara lay unconscious. Her thin arm, now much leaner, peeked out from under a white blanket, and I instinctively looked away. Despite our shock, we discussed with the doctor what steps to take next, concluding that as her family, we should care for her daily. David's job didn't allow him much time, so the majority of the caregiving fell to me, but I accepted this responsibility and continued to care for Barbara diligently. I would gently change her position and wipe her back, even though she remained unconscious. Every hour, I massaged her back and diligently rubbed her swollen legs, trying to improve her circulation. One day, I had to leave the hospital to pick up some necessities for Barbara's stay from a nearby drugstore. When I returned to the room with shopping bags in hand, I found Nancy there unexpectedly.
Nancy, you came to see Barbara.
I was genuinely happy that Nancy had come to visit Barbara. Despite everything, the fact that Nancy came to see her, even if it was a bit late, made me happy, thinking she must have been worried after hearing that Barbara had lost consciousness. Nancy glanced at me and then smirked unpleasantly, curling one side of her mouth.
This person hasn't regained consciousness even once since being brought to the hospital, it seems.
Yes, that's right. It seems her body has weakened since the fracture before.
Then it's about time, isn't it? I'll prepare the funeral wreath.
I was speechless at Nancy's words. Without showing any concern for me, Nancy looked down at Mom lying in the bed and said,
"So, I can finally say goodbye,"
and laughed mockingly before walking away. I was dumbfounded, unable to comprehend and too stunned to even feel angry. I sat down, placed my hand on my forehead, and sighed. This was too harsh to be a joke. Not funny at all. Is it even right to say such things about one's own parent? I don't have children, so I don't know, but I think I would be sad if my daughter spoke to me that way. As I was thinking, Barbara, who had been unconscious, slowly began to rise.
"Oh my! Barbara!"
I woke up because I heard Nancy's voice. That's right, there was something I wanted to tell before I die. Barbara spoke to me with a clarity unexpected from someone who had been unconscious. And I will never forget the smile on her face. Just 3 days later, Barbara passed away in the hospital where she was admitted. It was around the time when the buds on the cherry tree visible from the hospital room window were just beginning to bloom.
The cherry blossoms will be here soon,
I said to Barbara, and she smiled weakly. Take me outside, in a wheelchair or anything, she had said. I never thought she would pass away so soon. After Barbara passed away, David immediately notified the relatives as per the doctor's information. While the attending physician was filling out the death certificate for Barbara's body to be transported home, Nancy appeared out of nowhere. My expression darkened instantly, and I nudged David's shoulder.
See? Just like I predicted, right? I told you it was about time. Nancy. Enough is enough. Oh dear. Because you were looking after Mom for the inheritance, you find it troublesome that someone like me shows up, don't you?
I felt a rush of blood to my head, but David immediately shouted.
Get out!
He yelled. Nancy, seemingly taken aback by this, widened her eyes in surprise, but then smirked again and said,
Let's talk after the funeral is over. About what's to come.
She then left. I clenched my fists, feeling a tightness in my chest from frustration. The funeral proceeded without any hitches, but it was a challenging time for David and me. We were utterly exhausted. Most of the funeral arrangements were made by us. We contacted the funeral home, discussed the schedule and details, and held the service. Barbara had told David she preferred a small funeral, so we only invited close relatives. Nancy called us to the smoking area of the funeral home and handed us canned coffee. She took out a cigarette from her bag, lit it, and inhaled deeply with relish.
We should sell the family home and split Mom's savings and other assets in half, right?
Nancy asked, pointing the lit end of her cigarette towards David's face. Since neither David nor I smoked, we stood a bit away from the smoking area, resulting in our voices being raised to converse with Nancy.
We're not thinking about selling the house right now. Don't you think it's disrespectful to even discuss this so soon after the funeral? I wonder how it works in such cases. Should we assess the family home's value and then David pays me half of that?
Suppressing the urge to throw the can of coffee in Nancy's face, I stepped forward, ahead of David. Nancy looked at me somewhat surprised, stubbed out her cigarette in the ashtray, and lit another one.
Actually, Barbara mentioned there was a will. A will? I haven't heard about it. On that day you showed such disrespect to Barbara, who was unconscious. Barbara told me she had prepared a will while she was still in good health. And she told me what's in it.
Barbara, on that day, had left a note written hastily on stationery about the general contents of her will and a memo stating that no one was allowed to contest it. She had already entrusted the actual will to a notary, so she couldn't show it, but she weakly smiled, saying she remembered the contents well that she had noted down. When Barbara handed me the envelope containing the hastily written note, her expression was serene, as if she had resolved any lingering regrets. Nancy, with a cigarette between her lips, read the contents labeled will. Her expression gradually hardened, and when her gaze shifted from the will to me, she stubbed out her cigarette and approached. As Nancy got closer, the smell of cigarette prompted me to grimace involuntarily.
What do you mean by this? You're saying all of Mom's inheritance goes to you guys? Don't joke with me.
I glared at Nancy with a firm stance. When Barbara handed me this will, she had held my hand, thanked me, and with a face of sorrow I had never seen before, she pleaded. Please. I couldn't erase Barbara's beseeching face from my mind.
There's one will, but there's another document Barbara left behind. She asked me to make sure it's enforced, even if it means going to court. Don't beat around the bush. Just hand it over. What is this document? It's a promissory note.
At that, Nancy slightly raised her eyebrows and placed her hand on her chin.
What does that mean?
She seemed to be pondering, but it was clear Nancy didn't understand the significance of the term promissory note in this context. That was understandable. To be honest, I was also surprised when I first saw this promissory note. Whether Barbara was meticulous by nature or just precise about financial matters, she had recorded in great detail the money she had lent to her daughter, Nancy. The record of debts, listed with dates, times, amounts lent, and reasons, filled about half of the notebook. Most entries hinted at Nancy's financial contributions to boyfriends she had dated when she was younger. After I briefly explained the contents of the promissory note, Nancy confronted me, her face pale.
She recorded everything in such detail. Always criticizing the people I dated, always something. Linda, how much does it all come to? There's at least $80,000. However, there's no mention of the interest rate, so the statutory rate would apply. The actual amount on the promissory note was about $25,000, but I lied effortlessly. The repayment deadline had long passed, and Nancy, having some legal knowledge, would understand that this story didn't add up. Yet, I pressed on. I couldn't let Nancy take away the savings Barbara had accumulated or the family home she cherished. The original is with a lawyer, but Barbara had one suggestion before we proceed with a claim against Nancy.
Nancy was clearly flustered by this unexpected turn of events. While contemplating whether to light another cigarette and idly twirling it between her fingers, I conveyed to Nancy what Barbara had told me. If she didn't contest the inheritance, we would let the matter of the debt slide.
Most of Barbara's savings were used for the funeral, and selling the family home will take time. If you contest the inheritance, the debt repayment will commence immediately, which would surely complicate your life.
I tried to speak as gently as possible, not wanting to provoke Nancy. David, standing beside me, looked tense, glancing back and forth between Nancy and me. Soon, a staff member from the crematorium came too. "We're ready. Inform us." Watching Barbara's body being placed in the cremation chamber was a moment of profound sorrow, even for me. It must have been even more difficult for David. Yet, strangely, seeing her reduced to ashes brought a sense of peace. As we waited for the bus to take us home from the crematorium, David looked relieved, taking deep breaths of the fresh outdoor air. I stood silently by his side until Nancy approached us awkwardly and said,
"I'll go by the will. But please spare me the loan part. What about selling the family home? You can handle it however you like. But I can't pay back the loan."
After saying that, she didn't wait for our response and returned to the smoking area. David remained silent. Watching Nancy's retreating figure, he seemed to want to say something witty but eventually just looked down, resigned. Later, it was revealed that Nancy had quit her job, hoping to inherit from Barbara. She had moved to a downtown apartment and indulged in nightclub visits and luxury shopping, leading to financial distress. It was baffling how she could make such decisions. Believing there was a significant inheritance, Barbara had indeed lent Nancy a considerable amount of money, perhaps fostering Nancy's belief in available funds. Forced to move to a standard apartment and start a part-time job, Nancy's arrogant attitude led to her quick dismissal, and she eventually had to leave that apartment too. At the family court, when Barbara's will was unsealed in the presence of witnesses, it confirmed that all her assets were left to David and me, as Barbara had stated. Though it was expected, Nancy remained silent, sighing deeply and looking defeated. Nancy is now scraping by with a live-in part-time job, but we have no sympathy for her. David, her brother, shares my reluctance to interact further, and one day, the landline was removed from our home. We've decided to keep in touch only with close relatives. Yet, There's a part of me that wonders if this lonely conclusion was truly for the best. I wonder if this was truly the right ending for Barbara. Time passed, and as the first anniversary of Barbara's passing approached, having received the inheritance, we built a respectable grave and continued to live our lives as usual, mindful not to waste money unnecessarily. On a warm day heralding the arrival of spring, I noticed the white snowdrops that hadn't bloomed last year now adorning the flower bed visible through the open window. These flowers hung towards the ground, swaying like earrings. I couldn't help but step outside and bend down to admire the flowers in the flower bed. Among them were low-lying pansies and violas, adding a vibrant splash of color. I gently touched the snowdrops with my fingertips. David returned from a neighborhood stroll on his bicycle, his basket filled with various vegetables.
What's with all these vegetables?
Got them from the local farmer's market. They were cheap, so I bought a bunch.
Even if they were cheap, this is a lot.
Seeing the basket brimming with vegetables, I exclaimed,
"Ah."
And with a slightly mischievous expression, I suggested to David,
"Let's use these vegetables to make a variety of dishes that celebrate spring." "All of them? You think we can eat that much?"
"Why not invite Nancy over?" David widened his eyes, his smile tinged with disbelief, as if he'd misheard me. Nancy would likely have plenty of complaints about my vegetable dishes. But even if she's not fond of them, making fried vegetables might soften their bitterness, making them palatable. Still, Nancy might refuse to eat or even decline the invitation to our home altogether. Yet, if she did come over, I'd insist on showing her the snowdrops blooming in the garden. I'd bring her to the flower bed, have her sit where I am, and even suggest visiting Barbara's grave together, though she'd surely refuse. But if she found the flowers beautiful, I believe we might come to understand each other, even if just a little.
"I don't think you should go on that trip,"
I said with a cold voice, only to be met with an annoyed glare from my husband. He was getting ready to join his company's retreat, clearly not thrilled about my input.
"Look, it's not like I'm going out to play. It's a social obligation, and I can't just not show up without a good reason,"
he retorted in a mocking tone, followed by an exaggerated sigh. "Well, I've warned you. Just don't regret it later," I responded. My name is Grace. Currently, I'm a 28-year-old housewife. Anthony, my husband, and I have been together since our college days and got married after we both started working. He's 2 years older than me, and we got closer because we were in the same club. Well, to be more accurate, I joined the club because I was attracted to him. When I was a freshman, I was club hopping with some new friends I made. That's when I met Anthony, who was exceptionally noticeable due to his good looks while handing out flyers as the head of the club. One of my friends fell for him instantly and decided to join the club even before hearing what it was about. Eventually, dragged along by her enthusiasm, the rest of us submitted our membership forms and started participating. Unlike in middle or high school, I figured if I didn't like the club since it was just a hobby, I could just leave. That was the mindset of my other friends too, and we had agreed to join something anyways. Deep down, I also found Anthony charming. However, when the friend who had decided to join because of him started making moves, I decided to step back. Plus, there were quite a few other fans of his, making it difficult to get close. But how did I end up marrying him, you might ask? It was during the cultural festival that year, where our relationship rapidly developed. We were part of the music club, which performed in several groups during the festival. Anthony and I, along with a few others, ended up forming a band. For the first time, I felt genuinely glad to have joined the club and practiced an instrument. Discovering the joy of playing, I spent my free time in the club room. As the festival approached, I was there even more often. Sometimes, it was just Anthony and me, and through these moments, we grew closer and started dating after the festival, with me making the first move. However, after our successful performance at the festival, Anthony gained more admirers, and I chose to keep our relationship a secret. I wanted to brag about being with him, and he said it was unnecessary to hide. But he didn't understand my fear of other women's jealousy. We often targeted weekdays when it was less crowded for our outings. It felt like a secret date, which was fun in its own way, and I cherished the time I could spend with my husband. But then, he started his job search. Until he got an offer, even my usually calm husband was understandably tense. He seemed to have less time for part-time jobs, often complaining about being broke every time we met. Since the days we could meet were getting fewer, I secretly increased my shifts and used the money I earned to cook for him.
I feel pathetic having to rely on this,
he would say, yet he happily devoured every meal I made. From that time, I vaguely imagined our life together as a married couple, though I thought it was too soon to mention it to my busy boyfriend. Eventually, when he landed a job and graduated, and I had my graduation confirmed, we got engaged. He rented a new apartment due to his job, and I often visited, almost living there. We were in a semi-cohabiting state, but he paid for the rent and utilities with his salary, so I helped out with household chores in return. I would make meals to last several days and store them in the fridge, take out the trash in the morning, and clean the bathroom and toilet. I thought I was doing well, but it turned out my husband was quite lazy. When I couldn't come over for a week due to some errands, I found the floor littered with trash. Maybe because it was his first year working, he often had entertainment duties and would leave the room unventilated. Opening the door to a room filled with the smell of sweat and garbage required bravery. But I loved my hard-working husband, and I appreciated his thoughtfulness, like bringing home fancy sweets to say thank you. After graduating, I worked in an office for a year, but then, at my husband's strong request, I became a housewife. The reason was simple. I want you to take care of the house. His lifestyle habits remained the same, with me handling most of the household chores. Additionally, the number of drinking parties increased over the years, making financial management challenging. However, since we lived on my husband's income, it was hard to ask him to cut down on social gatherings. He was supportive when I occasionally met with friends, even giving me some pocket money for those outings. But I couldn't stay silent and watch our household expenses increase, so I brought it up with him several times. At first, he would say, "It's okay, the entertaining expenses are covered by the company. The money comes back." But gradually, he started giving specific reasons, like, "Today is a colleague's birthday," or "I can't miss a promotion celebration." It became harder for me to object. My husband had a close group of friends at work. I heard from a university friend who also landed a job there. That friend was the one who had a crush on him and led us to join the club. She was already married and said it was a coincidence that she ended up working at the same place as my husband. When I mentioned my husband was Anthony, she had to think for a moment.
Who was that again?
It seems she had completely forgotten about the man she once eagerly pursued. She told me a lot about my husband. He was always with his close-knit group, and there were no other women involved, which was a relief. But the weekly spending on drinks was a problem. I kept asking him to cut back on the drinking sessions, but he couldn't refuse invitations from dear friends. Even when I argued about the expenses, he only suggested reducing the amount spent per occasion instead of not going at all. Looking back, we should have had a serious discussion about this early in our marriage. As time went on, things became more ambiguous, and I started to give up. My husband stopped mentioning his outings unless I asked, and it seemed like he had created his own rule of going out on weekends. Approaching his 30s, He hadn't changed his living habits from his student days, only capable of leaving his clothes on the floor. I had gotten used to taking care of him, so even though I was frustrated, I stopped bringing it up. I figured if we were going to fight about it, I might as well let him do what he wanted. Then one day, my husband mentioned he would be joining the company's retreat.
A company retreat when it's not even a long weekend?
If it were during a long weekend, everywhere would be crowded.
The idea is to go at a different time so we can actually relax,
he explained. I'm okay with him participating in the trip since he's been working hard. But the cost is what worries me. Even if the travel expenses are covered, things like meals and souvenirs will likely be out of pocket. With the warmer days, his drinking outings have become more frequent, and our expenses have grown more severe. And there's something about this retreat that's bothering me.
Maybe you should skip it? You've been really busy lately and must be exhausted. It's a work obligation, and everyone's expected to go,
he said, though his expression softened. He seemed really keen on going. For once, I pressed harder.
Are you sure you want to go? We can't afford to spend more right now with all our bills.
Thinking I was angry, he raised his voice.
Are you seriously telling me not to go now? You say we don't have money, but it's all coming from my salary anyway. Don't act so high and mighty.
It seems he made me a housewife just to say this, thinking it would silence me. True to form, I stayed quiet, and he, feeling reassured, said,
You've had fewer friends since we got married. You're just jealous of me.
I was irritated but too dismayed to retort. Who's been sacrificing social ties to keep this household running? I was on the verge of saying it, but lacked the energy to bother.
Fine, do whatever you want.
At that, he momentarily looked triumphant. Then patronizingly patted my head, asking sweetly,
What would you like for a souvenir?
Ever since college, he's believed his wife adores him. Having been quite popular, his self-esteem seems quite inflated. His life has been so charmed that his lack of malice is actually more problematic. Turns out, the trip was set for the very next day, and he left early in the morning, full of enthusiasm. Surprisingly, he managed all the preparations himself, dragging along a neat suitcase he must have bought at some point. During the week he was gone, I had a peaceful time. It made me wonder if this is how it feels when your children are grown and independent. I've essentially been raising a large child for years. Taking a week off won't hurt. By the time he returned from the trip, it was already late at night. He seemed a bit worn out, probably from taking the night bus.
Were you okay this week? I was worried about the bills and everything.
Yeah, everything was fine, I assured him.
See, I told you there was nothing to worry about. I'll start earning again from next week, so don't fret,
he said, perhaps a bit smugly after drinking on the bus. I was annoyed but didn't show it, simply replying, Maybe so, and tried to leave. However, he didn't like my response and shouted after me,
What's with that attitude?
As he's gotten older, he tends to get angry suddenly when he got drunk. I was surprised at first, but now it's become routine whenever he returns from drinking.
I'm tired too. Please don't raise your voice. Make sure all your laundry is in the basket, and if there's trash, sort it out.
I'm going to bed now. He said something else, but I quickly went to bed. The next morning, his phone rang early. Annoyed, he got up, glanced at the screen, and clicked his tongue. I took the day off. What now? It was his office calling. He got up, left the bedroom. And I secretly watched, somewhat predicting what would happen next. After a few minutes on the phone, he changed into a suit and left the house. Wondering when he would come back, I woke up to wash the pile of clothes he had left behind. It was a few hours later when my husband returned. As soon as he entered the house, he called out to me, shouting,
"This is all your fault for causing such a mess."
Let's rewind to a week ago. In the evening, after hearing about the company retreat from my husband, I immediately called a friend. I had never heard about the retreat from her, despite our daily chats. When she said,
"There's no company retreat,"
I realized something. My husband probably lied about going on the retreat to avoid being stopped by me. Perhaps to hang out with those colleagues, or maybe even to meet another woman. Either way, I no longer cared. Who would sympathize with a husband who lies and abandons his wife to go out? Before I knew it, I was asking my friend for a favor. To report this to the company. After all, we were barely making ends meet. There was no way he could afford a week-long trip on his own. If the retreat was a lie, where would the money for it come from? Though I didn't want to think about it, my friend and I eventually came to the same conclusion. I told her it would be great if she could say she was the one who leaked it. My friend seemed to have acted immediately. The company waited for them to return from their trip and then called them in. During that time, the company thoroughly investigated them. What followed was a series of records of misused expenses being uncovered. Their desks were found to be filled with blank receipts from various stores. They likely used these to falsely claim expenses for their numerous drinking outings, applying this money towards their trip this time. This was mostly accurate, and they admitted their guilt when called in.
"We plan to submit it as a business expense for the retreat,"
they confessed. Everyone involved had repeatedly misused expenses, leading to a total loss of around several $1,000s. Naturally, they were all dismissed and faced claims for restitution and damages. Furious upon returning, my husband yelled at me,
"This is all your fault."
I don't know why he thought I reported him to the company. Since my friend was the one who actually reported it, I was relieved she wouldn't be harmed. Ignoring his own actions, he raged in front of me, where I presented him with the already filled-out divorce papers.
"Getting caught was your own fault. That's why I told you to cancel the trip. But if you've been doing this all along, it was bound to come out sooner or later."
Though he glared and trembled, he snatched the divorce papers, saying,
"I'm better off without a snitching, spiteful wife,"
and threw them at me as if to slap me with them.
"Good, this makes things easier. Goodbye, then."
With that, I left, carrying the bags I had already packed. He kept his back to me until I left the room, perhaps out of pride. I caught a glimpse of his graying hairline and felt a twinge of sadness for the Anthony I once admired. Then, I headed to the small apartment I had already arranged. I never thought I'd use my savings from a year of work this way. Although I had some savings, the initial moving costs significantly depleted. Now, I need to find a job. After being a housewife for so long without any particular qualifications, I wonder if I can find work. At first, any job will do. I decided to work and become independent. After informing my parents about the finalized divorce, I also contacted my friend. One of them, concerned about me, suggested we meet up after a long time. That's right. Now that I'm divorced, I should live my life freely. I won't be forced to do household chores for anyone else. I just need to take care of myself. What a freedom. The next day, after spending a day unpacking, I immediately started looking for a job. I found some listings on job sites, prepared my applications, and went for interviews. Before I knew it, 2 weeks had passed while I was busy with this routine. The calls from my ex-husband became more frequent. On the other end of the phone, Anthony alternated between anger and tears. Having relied on me for household and financial management, he had run out of money within these 2 weeks. He had no savings habit, so his account was completely empty. With several bills due at the end of the month, Anthony asked me for a loan, saying, "We're divorced, so I have no obligation to pay for you. If you really need a loan, are you okay with interest?
Why do you have spare money? Aren't you ashamed to have been saving secretly just for yourself? This calls for a redistribution of property. Come back right now."
Anthony, infuriated by my advantageous position, screamed so loudly the audio cracked.
It's fine if you want to claim a redistribution of property, but that process is complicated and time-consuming. By the time you get it sorted, the month's end will be here. Then come over right now and give me half. Or remarry me for a while and take care of me.
Frustrated by Anthony's self-centered demands, I ended the call without a word. I realized there was no getting through to him, and the thought of still being liked by him became physically repulsive. Of course, after setting my phone to block his calls, they stopped. Eventually, I secured a job at a food factory. Wanting to avoid any trouble with Anthony, I opted for a behind-the-scenes role. Working and sweating after a long break felt refreshing. Being single again, I reconnected with friends from my student days and started going out more. After a few meetings, my friends said I looked rejuvenated, and I felt a profound sense of fulfillment in my daily life.
I never imagined our house could be burgled,
I muttered to myself. The day after our home was burglarized, I still couldn't grasp that it had happened to me. I was reflecting on my inability to act at the moment. Mother-in-law, concerned, hurriedly asked,
"Did you see the face of the culprit?"
However, an event that would save me from despair happened shortly after. My name is Mia. I'm 29 years old. I was married to Thomas, a year older than me, and we had a reasonably happy life. But recently, after losing Dad, I've felt a gaping hole in my heart. Dad gave me not only a lot of love, but also many lessons. Even after retiring, Dad never felt left behind by the current times. I remember him studying about money with enthusiasm, even as many others settled into a quiet life receiving their pensions. Dad continued to learn new things after retirement, never stopping despite my concerns. Worried, I suggested, "Dad, you've retired from your job. Why not take a break for a while?" But Dad, with a cheerful smile, replied,
"I've worked hard for many years and can't suddenly stop. I'm just doing things I'm interested in as my way of preventing dementia. Don't worry about me."
Half in disbelief yet fond of Dad, I watched over his actions, thinking if it's what he likes, then it's okay. When I got married, Dad was overjoyed, saying,
"I'm relieved to see Mia so happy. I have no regrets in this world,"
with tears in his eyes. My husband and I, telling Dad to stop joking, laughed together. A few days after the wedding, Dad and I spent some father-daughter time together, during which he said,
"Mia, I'll leave you plenty of money, so don't worry about finances even if you start a family."
To which I replied, "Dad, I appreciate the thought, but don't waste your retirement like that. Actually, I want to take you on a trip. Let's enjoy some leisure time together." I thought I'd finally be able to show my gratitude. However, Dad, who had been so vibrant, suddenly passed away, and I was left feeling hopeless after the funeral. Seeing Dad's inheritance was shocking. Gold bars? I was speechless at the sight, not knowing their significance initially. But I soon learned of Dad's intentions. Research revealed that gold bars hold their value over years, hardly depreciating. Dad left me a lasting fortune to secure my future even decades after his passing. Reflecting on it, Dad often said,
"In today's world, the value of money can fluctuate, so Mia, you should do your research."
At the time, I dismissed it due to daily busyness. Realizing now that Dad converted his wealth into gold bars to leave it for me, I couldn't be more grateful. Wanting to honor Dad's wishes, I kept the gold bars hidden even from my husband. Yet, someone had the audacity to say,
I heard Mia's dad passed away, so you must have gotten a hefty inheritance, right? Share some with me.
Shockingly, these words came from my husband. His words were so unthinkable that I didn't respond. Then he said,
I've been feeling unmotivated at work and thinking of quitting to make a quick fortune. Winning a little makes me feel recognized, and it'd be a relief for you too if I became wealthy, right?
Realizing what he meant, I asked,
Is that some kind of gambling?
He boasted,
Well, kinda. But I'm not like those unsuccessful gamblers.
I thought about discussing and deciding together on necessities like a house or car for us as a couple. But then, my husband started saying,
I also want to upgrade everything I wear to high-end brands.
I was speechless, not knowing he was this kind of person. I decided to keep it stored in a safe that only I could access. To me, what Dad left behind is as precious as life itself. I couldn't bear to squander it on my husband's whims, so I refused. However, since he wouldn't give up asking, I took the bold step of consulting my mother-in-law. Mother-in-law had been supportive since I was dating her son and continued to be so after marriage. After I told mother-in-law everything, she listened, nodding, and said, I'm sorry about this. Let's have a discussion, the three of us. When I mentioned to my husband that we would discuss Dad's inheritance with mother-in-law, he seemed thrilled, thinking his wishes would finally be met. Later, eager to state his case, he said,
Given the uncertainty of lifelong employment, I've been working on a side hustle. I'd like a share of Mia's dad's inheritance to make it successful.
A side hustle, or rather, gambling. I almost blurted out, but mother-in-law immediately mentioned, I saw you entering a slot shop recently. The room froze at her words. My husband made feeble excuses but was asked by mother-in-law to show his savings, revealing almost nothing. Mother-in-law scolded him with an expression I'd never seen before.
Thomas, enough is enough. Work properly without complaints. If you target Mia's dad's inheritance again, I won't forgive you.
Yet, my husband responded with dissatisfaction.
Okay, I get it. But you're both taking a joke too seriously.
I said,
There are things you can joke about and things you shouldn't.
To which mother-in-law added,
Exactly. Haven't I always taught you that?
Embarrassed by the scolding from both of us, he left for home as if fleeing. I thanked mother-in-law, saying,
I couldn't have persuaded him alone. Thank you.
Mother-in-law replied, It's okay. Thank you for marrying such a son. In return, she thanked me. Then she muttered, Thomas really is a handful. I didn't miss a word and asked,
Does that mean Stephen too?
Mother-in-law nodded slightly. I knew Thomas had a brother named Stephen but hadn't really spoken to him. We only greeted each other during a family meeting, and I remembered his voice being deeper than Thomas's. I regret not having tried to interact more, not knowing how to approach him. I took this opportunity to ask mother-in-law about brother-in-law. Mother-in-law said, Stephen quits jobs as soon as he dislikes them and is currently freelancing. I'm worried about his future.
I wish he would settle into a stable job, but job changes are becoming more common these days.
Mother-in-law continued, but it seemed brother-in-law's reasons for quitting were somewhat trivial. Mother-in-law had been worried for a long time. I couldn't admonish brother-in-law myself, so I just listened to mother-in-law, who had been worried for a long time. Worried about mother-in-law's well-being, I bought a concert ticket for her too. And we decided to go together, hoping it would help her relax and refresh. On the day of the concert, my husband had already left for work, and I was looking forward to it with mother-in-law. But after walking a bit, I felt like I had forgotten something. After rummaging through my bag, I realized in horror. I'm sorry. I forgot the most important thing, the tickets. When I told mother-in-law, she surprisingly said,
It's okay. We can go back and make it. Let's go together.
I'm sorry. Please wait here. I'll run back and get them. And ran off. I burst through the front door, heading straight for the room. There, in front of the safe containing Dad's inheritance, I encountered a person clad entirely in black. In my haste, and unsure if I was dreaming or awake, I screamed. The burglar shoved me aside and fled. Although I was confused about what was happening, I confirmed the burglar had taken the gold bars and immediately called the police. I explained everything to mother-in-law at home and apologized. When the police arrived and I was describing the burglar's features and the situation, mother-in-law rushed over to my house, anxiously asking,
Mia, are you okay? You really encountered the burglar? Did you see his face? Did you tell the police everything? I shook my head in despair.
While mother-in-law was saddened, I reassured her.
It's okay. The police are here, taking my statement.
Then, looking at the safe, mother-in-law lamented. Oh, what a mess. I hadn't shared the code or hiding place with anyone. Although it was only until I could deposit them in a bank safe, the safe I had chosen was among the most secure available commercially. Supposedly impervious to ordinary household tools. The police, having seen the scene, speculated that the burglar either had specialized tools or was an experienced criminal. I continued to provide details to the police. Afterwards, I told mother-in-law.
The investigation will start now, and it might take a while, so please go back home and rest for now. I'm sorry for today.
Mother-in-law responded.
All right. I don't want to be in the way. I'll contact you later.
And left. However, mother-in-law returned about an hour later, drenched in sweat.
Mia, listen,
she exclaimed, causing me and the police to freeze and turn towards her. What happened? I asked, to which mother-in-law revealed.
When I went back, I saw Stephen entering his room with something that looked like gold bars. I thought I should get evidence before confronting him, so I didn't question him right away. It's about your dad's inheritance, isn't it?
When mother-in-law mentioned that, I immediately responded.
It's the gold bars.
Mother-in-law said.
Understood. Now, listen to this.
And played a recording from her phone for us.
I managed to get the stuff out, but Mia caught me at the worst possible moment.
Really screwed up there.
And knowing how she showed up just then.
The recording clearly captured someone speaking foully. That low and distinctive voice was unmistakably Stephen's. I was certain of it. It also captured a strategy session over the phone with my husband on how to deceive the police if questioned. After recording the scene, mother-in-law, though shocked, submitted it to the police. Apologizing, mother-in-law said, I'm really sorry for causing you distress. I just thought I had to secure some evidence. I quickly assured her. You did nothing wrong, Thomas's mom. My primary concern is catching the burglar as soon as possible. Your evidence was incredibly helpful. Thank you. The police immediately headed to brother-in-law's location, where he confessed to conspiring with my husband.
Thomas wanted the gold bars to pay compensation to his mistress's husband.
Brother-in-law revealed. Mother-in-law and I were stunned, blurting out.
What? An affair?
Nodding, brother-in-law continued.
My brother was trying to convince Mia to hand over the gold bars to cover up the affair without it being discovered.
Hearing this, I remarked,
Thomas said he was gambling, thinking that would convince me.
Brother-in-law replied,
He started gambling on his own, hoping to pay off without any help. But as his savings dwindled, he became desperate and tried to persuade Mia to give him the gold bars.
That explains the time my husband begged for money. I thought to myself. When I asked,
And then?
Brother-in-law continued,
A few days later, when Mia wouldn't agree, Thomas called again, saying we'd execute the burglary plan on a day Mia was out. He promised me a share if we succeeded, so I followed his instructions and committed the crime.
Hearing this, I realized my husband had his brother do it, likely because he knew his own physique and mannerisms might give him away. Not only was Dad's inheritance stolen, but I also learned of the affair, and I decided it was over with my husband. Just as brother-in-law had confessed, my husband returned home.
Mia, I've heard about what happened. Are you hurt? Everything okay?
He asked, putting on a poorly acted concern. Unaware of brother-in-law's confession, my husband was puzzled by the cold looks around him, saying,
Well, losing Dad's precious inheritance is sad, but what's lost is lost, right? We can rebuild our fortune together from scratch.
Trying to dismiss the police and grab my shoulder. Disgusted by my husband after hearing everything from brother-in-law, I pushed him away, saying,
Stop. Don't touch me.
Surprised, he looked at me.
Mia, what's gotten into you all of a sudden? You're scared of the police, right? Let's talk, just the two of us.
Trying to drag me outside forcibly. I resisted, but he was too strong and dragged me along, leaving me feeling helpless. The police intervened. She said to stop, so let her go, restraining him with several officers.
Everything from the burglary plan to your affair has been exposed.
The police informed him as he struggled and attempted to flee. However, his escape was futile and he was caught. Thus, the gold bars were safely returned to me. The day after the burglary incident, still in disbelief, I muttered to myself,
I never imagined a burglary could happen at my house.
Unforgivable actions by my husband and brother-in-law led me to file a lawsuit immediately. While my husband received a suspended sentence, brother-in-law, having no job and supporting himself through crime, was found guilty of other offenses and received a prison sentence. Brother-in-law had the tools for the job, and it wasn't his first time breaking safes. I hoped this would be a wake-up call for others involved in crime. Mother-in-law, devastated by her son's actions, tearfully said,
I hope they fully pay for their crimes.
My heart ached, but preventing further victims was necessary. I demanded compensation from my husband and his mistress. My husband, now facing a slew of misfortunes, desperately pleaded, Let's not divorce, Mia.
It was all my fault.
I only love you. I can't pay the compensation. Resorting to tears, but I felt no sympathy and refused to forgive him.
How are you planning to cash them? Did you really think you could just walk into a shop with a large amount of gold bars and smoothly sell them? You need a personal number to sell something of this size. Did you think you could just use the inheritance I received as you pleased?
Stumbling over his words, my husband admitted, When you put it that way, yes. He knew he had no right to decide how to use my inherited wealth.
Blinded by immediate financial gain, you didn't think through the consequences of your actions.
I told him, and he could only look down, silent. Searching for a way to break into such a sturdy safe, committing a crime to get his hands on it. Yet not thinking about the aftermath at all was absurdly foolish. I announced our divorce right there and then. Finally, after all the procedures were completed, I felt relieved. The move, funded by my husband's compensation, was completed. I became a free person. As for my husband, his misdeeds were exposed to his company, leading to his job loss. Disowned by his family and with no savings, he began doing day labor to pay the compensation. Struggling with his deteriorating life and failing workplace relationships. It seems he planned another burglary due to being unable to cope with these challenges. Naturally, without any accomplices, he was caught by the returning residents and beaten. It's the second time. Please have mercy. My husband reportedly pleaded, but the residents mercilessly called the police. He was sentenced to prison. This time, he truly couldn't return to a normal life. The burglary occurred near my previous home, and I heard the story directly from the neighbor involved. After the first burglary at my former house, my husband became well known throughout the neighborhood. Without the means to go far, he committed another crime nearby. Finally, we parted with, "It's a dangerous world out there. Let's both be careful. Take care." After the trial, mother-in-law was mentally damaged and struggled to recover. So, I frequently visited and maintained our relationship. I wanted to do everything I could for mother-in-law, who had always been kind to me. Thanks to my care, mother-in-law gradually recovered. We still have a good relationship today. I want to live my life gratefully for the peaceful days and the people around me, hoping for this tranquility to last forever.
Kids are really at a disadvantage when their parents have low-paying jobs, aren't they?
Sandra, a mother of one of my son's teammates, always seemed to harbor an intense hostility towards me. To be honest, I never really liked her. One day, I was invited by her for lunch. Sensing something unpleasant, I decided to take the initiative. "Do you know about my father?" Days later, I showed up at the lunch hosted by Sandra in a luxury car, and her attitude completely changed. "I'm Ashley, a 32-year-old office worker. I met my husband George through work. We hit it off and started dating. We're a close-knit family of 3, blessed with our son. He is Noah, 5 years old now. As he grew, he joined a local baseball team, and I found myself constantly busy with work and social commitments. To be honest, I've never been keen on mingling with the other moms from the team, but supporting my son's baseball games naturally led to more interactions. Among these new acquaintances was Sandra. Her child and Noah were good friends, so I tried to get along with her. But Sandra was a bit of a handful. She always dressed in high-end brands, and all she talked about was how elite her husband was. Because of that, she was somewhat ostracized by others. Still, being on the same team meant I couldn't just ignore her. Plus, our sons were friends, so I tried to accept her like everyone else did. One day, as usual, I was at a tea party hosted by Sandra. Calling it a tea party might be a stretch since it was really just a session to listen to her boast. It was never enjoyable. Sandra was usually the one doing all the talking, but that day she was strangely cheerful and even seemed interested in what others had to say. The friends around us were engaging in lively conversations, but I was suspicious. Wondering what was going on, Sandra suddenly gave me a sly smile and turned the conversation to me.
"By the way, your husband is George, right? My husband said he saw him at a subsidiary the other day. Is that true?"
As I looked puzzled by her question, her smile deepened, and she looked at me as if she was sizing me up.
"I can't believe your husband works at a subsidiary.
Is there a problem?" "My husband works hard and is up for promotion," I countered.
You know, you're always at our tea parties, right? I thought maybe it was taking a toll on your finances. Subsidiary jobs don't pay that well, I guess."
She looked at me with pity, and I couldn't help but feel annoyed. I confidently responded that I worked too and were not struggling. But she just laughed at my reply.
"Both spouses working is a sign of poverty, you know. It's sad, having to work because your husband doesn't earn enough."
Her attitude was clearly mocking. I tried to explain that I work because I enjoy it, but she seemed to take it as me being defensive. She continued to insinuate that working couples are poor and that I must struggle to afford luxury brands. As I observed her, it dawned on me why she was in such a good mood. She had probably found something to ridicule me about today. I was genuinely upset. Whatever I said to her was dismissed as bravado, leaving me no room for a comeback. I couldn't understand why she suddenly treated me like an enemy. That day ended unresolved. Later, I was heading to the park with Noah. He was excited about possibly being chosen as the baseball team's ace for the next game. We were about to go to our usual practice spot when we ran into Sandra. Her son was usually a regular in the team, and I assumed it was the same that time. But she seemed downcast today. Curiously, I greeted her and asked, "Is something wrong with your son, Sandra?" Her response was sharp, pointing at my child.
"Your kid took my son's position. All his hard work for nothing, beaten by a poor kid."
Seeing her hold her son, I realized why she treated me like an enemy at the tea party. Noah had taken the ace position her son had, and she resented me for it. Needless to say, Noah had also worked hard, and team positions are the coach's decision, not ours. However, she probably couldn't accept it with her high pride.
"Hand that regular spot over to my son right now. I have all the money you could want. How much do you need?"
Her words infuriated me. It was only natural, considering she was trying to buy Noah's hard-earned regular spot with money. Annoyed, I shot back at her.
"We don't need your money. My son earned his regular spot through his own efforts. Besides, even your son wouldn't want a spot that was bought with money."
Her son looked down and nodded slightly at my words. Seeing that, I glared at her with frustration. Clearly, she didn't appreciate my attitude.
"Impudent woman. You think you've won just because you're poor?"
With those words, she roughly grabbed her son's hand and stormed off. Since that day, we hadn't talked much. It seemed like our friends noticed the change too. Due to the rumors spread by Sandra, everyone sided with her. I started being avoided even by friends I was close to and felt isolated even when cheering for Noah's baseball games. Despite that, I wanted to support him, so I tried to act as usual. Cheering loudly for Noah and trying to remain cheerful, I sometimes felt the stinging gazes from others. Yet, I refused to be intimidated by Sandra's threats and continued to stand my ground. I was aware of the rumors about me, mostly spread by her. In a way, that made me even more determined to maintain a strong stance. Then one day, as I was getting ready to leave after the game, Sandra approached me with some friends.
"Hi. You're as stubborn as ever. Anyway, I'm hosting a dinner at my house. I've invited all members of the baseball team, so you're welcome to come if you want."
I frowned at her words. I never expected her to invite me, especially given our bad relationship.
"I really want you to come. I don't want to continue like this. It's pitiful to see you standing alone. Your son will eventually realize what's happening. Imagine how he'll react when he knows his mother is suffering because of himself. You understand, don't you?"
She kept looking at me with her challenging gaze. I simply replied without averting her eyes, "Understood."
"That's great. And bring your husband too. It's good for him to socialize as well. Besides, you'd feel uneasy coming alone, right? My husband will be there too, so invite yours. I'll send the details and date in the team chat,"
said she before turning and leaving. The friends around us looked anxious throughout the exchange. After watching Sandra's retreating figure, I was left with a bitter expression. Honestly, I had a bad feeling. It was clear she was plotting something. Therefore, before she could make her move, I decided to take the initiative. The day of the dinner arrived. George had an urgent work commitment, so he was going to be late. I called Sandra early in the morning to let her know. When she heard about George's emergency work, she laughed mockingly and said,
"It's sad when children suffer because their parents have low-paying jobs."
Her usual sarcasm, you know? After a while of her usual snide remarks, she hung up. I was upset but continued preparing to head to my parents' house, just a few minutes' walk from ours. Since George took my car for work, I decided to borrow a car from my parents. After getting the car, I headed straight to Sandra's place. Approaching the area, I joined a line of friends also driving there. Sandra was directing friends to a parking lot near her house, which she managed, so parking was hassle-free. When it was my turn, Sandra looked surprised at my car. No wonder, since I wasn't in my usual car but my parents' luxury vehicle.
Ashley! Hey, roll down the window! Why are you in such a luxury car? It's the same model as my family's car. Did you buy it just to compete with me?
Despite her assertive words, she looked shaken. I rolled down the window and greeted her smiling.
I had to borrow it from my parents. Sandra, do you know about my father?
She scowled at me.
I wouldn't know anything about a poor family. Then I'll introduce you later,
I said, driving into the parking lot as instructed. She stood there, mouth agape, watching me leave. Thank you for the invitation today, I told Sandra after parking, handing her a cake I brought as a gift. On that day, I wasn't in my usual casual attire. I dressed appropriately for her dinner party, including some discreet branded accessories. She bit her lip and confronted me.
Explain yourself. How can someone like you afford high-end brand accessories and cakes from upscale shops?
Her loud voice drew the attention of friends around us. Amidst the gathered attention, I calmly answered her questions. I haven't mentioned it, but I'm the daughter of a film company president. This cake is recommended by my mother for attending your dinner. I chose the clothes myself. Is there a problem? Her mouth fell open again. She remained frozen for a while before finally speaking in a strained voice.
A film company? You mean where my husband works?
Unbelieving, I showed her a family photo with my father, who was also featured on the film company's website, thinking it would convince her. Still, she refused to believe.
That's a lie. It's just a photo you took when you met somewhere, right? I don't believe it. So, you rented a luxury car and wore high-end brand clothes, bringing a cake from a famous store, all because of the harassment, right?
No, I just chose an outfit and a gift suitable for the occasion. I borrowed the car from my parents because my husband had an urgent job.
A poor person like you being the daughter of a president is just a story, not reality. Stop joking. Do you really want to reconcile with me? I invited you here, offering a chance to apologize.
She yelled hysterically, throwing and stomping on the cake I brought as a gift. I was utterly appalled by her behavior, which was far from someone wanting to reconcile. As her shouting echoed through the yard, a man hurried out from the house, probably worried about her. It was her husband, David. When our eyes met, I smiled at him, which seemed to shock him.
What? The president's daughter here?
His surprise prompted Sandra to turn to him sharply. Despite her intimidating demeanor, David politely greeted me.
Good evening, ma'am. I'm David, nice to meet you. What brings you here today? Anything wrong with the president?
Worried, I turned to him and explained. I was invited by Sandra. His reaction was one of sheer astonishment.
Wow, you two are acquaintances. I didn't know that. The world is indeed small. How did you two meet?
Our sons are on the same baseball team. There was a little conflict when my son replaced your son as a regular, but Sandra invited me here today to make amends. Seems I'm not welcome, though. He then turned to Sandra, suspecting something.
Sandra, tell me. The poor person you always talk about is...
She started sweating profusely. Seemingly she had been bad-mouthing me at home too. Realizing that, I narrowed my eyes. She got in panic and started to deny everything, clinging to David.
It's not her. She's the daughter of a film company president. It can't be. We're actually good friends, right?
Ignoring her pleading glance, I remained expressionless. After what she had done, I had no intention of saving her face. As I was about to retort, someone tapped my shoulder. When I looked back, there was my husband, George. Sorry for being late. I finished work earlier than I thought, so I came. Is something wrong? He had a suspicious look on his face. He looked at Sandra and David, and it seemed like he had noticed something as he spoke. Remember me? We talked at work recently.
Of course, you're the upcoming president.
Then, George blushed and said, Not sure yet. He scratched his head. Seeing their exchange, Sandra was speechless with shock. I picked up the trampled cake and handed it back to her. Do you believe me now? Visibly shaken, she tried to appease me with an ingratiating tone.
I had no idea of your status. I'm so sorry for everything.
She pleaded, but I shook my head. Don't worry about it. We were never close friends to begin with. There's no point in pretending now. My response visibly shocked her, prompting David to ask in a low tone.
What's that about?
He said. Frightened, Sandra looked at me with a pale face.
Sandra has been making snide remarks to me for a while now. She even complained when our son earned a regular spot on the team, offering to pay for it, and when I refused, she started harassing me. She invited me today to make amends, but it's fine.
We're leaving. I laid out Sandra's actions to David, who then glared at her angrily. After sharing a smile with George, we left the scene. Following the incident at Sandra's house, the harassment stopped. Besides, the story spread among the team mothers, isolating her instead. The other mothers, seeing her downfall, suddenly started cozying up to me. I couldn't bring myself to like them though. Fond of being in a group, Sandra might be struggling, but I had no intention of helping. It was all her doing. Eventually, Sandra left the baseball team as her misdeeds were exposed. That caused David to be furious with her. Her access to money was also reduced. Her misconduct became neighborhood gossip. Although they were some exaggerated, given her character, I couldn't help but wonder if some were true. However, when whispers of relief about her not getting divorced circulated, I felt a pang of sympathy. Time passed, and Noah moved up to elementary school. Sandra's son, apparently attending a private school, meant no future interactions between us. Noah continued to excel in baseball, and George and I worked even harder to ensure he could pursue his passion without any hindrance.